Chapter 192. A chapter of more than 7,000 words. The night grew darker and darker. Darkness spread between heaven and earth like dyed ink. In the courtyard without light, there was only wind and rain. The raging wind threw rain into the pavilion. In front of the stone table in the center of the pavilion, Li Tianlan held a teacup in his hand and sat motionless. Gong Sun Qi had been gone for a long time. The tea in front of him had long been cold, but the teacup in Li Tianlan's hand was still warm. The tea in the cup was like boiling magma under the hot temperature. Steam filled the air and water splashed, but he didn't notice it. He just calmly thought about his own things. At this moment, Li Tianlan was different from the madness in the battle or the gentleness in the normal state. When he was thinking seriously, he was like a statue. He looked lifeless and didn't upgrade at all, but he exuded an almost oppressive solemnity from the inside out. The master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibing, the final battle with Gu Xingyun on June 15, the undercurrents between Jianghu State and East Island, the looming mysterious force in the dark, and Gong Sun Qi's sudden visit today. Vaguely, for the first time, Li Tianlan felt that he seemed to have become a participant in the general trend. If Gong Sun Qi didn't lie to him, then his identity had been completely exposed now. After returning from East Island, no, even from now on, he would face the hostility from Kunlun City, the looming killing intent from the Wang family of Beihai, and the enemies that could be seen or not, who would suddenly jump out to attack him or even give him a fatal blow before he had time to attack. What should the Li family do in the future? What should the East Emperor Palace do? Since he entered the secular world, it seemed to be the first time that he seriously thought about the future survival and the future situation. In the past, the superficial conflicts between him and Kunlun City were actually nothing. He killed Lu Xiuwei, offended Gu Yunxia, Yang Mengjiang's inexplicable disappearance, and even killed Gu Changjiang. As long as he could pay enough, these were all things that could be forgiven. But his identity, for Kunlun City and even the Wang family of Beihai, was a major event that could never be ignored. The crisis was imminent, and the looming danger kept stimulating his heart. Li Tianlan instinctively began to think about the situation he would face in the future. Seriously speaking, his current background was actually quite strong. Sai City would be the strongest support behind him. Ning Qianqing was still by his side, and Dongqing Rushi also appeared by his side. Therefore, at present, it seemed that the Dongqing clan was also trustworthy. At least for now, he didn't need to be on guard. The academics had been silent since the decisive battle on the 15th of June, and the request he made to Zhuang Huayang was not met with any difficulties. Most importantly, the chief of the academics had brought Li Wangxing out from the border, which in itself was a kind of support. Although the East Emperor Palace was now a newly established institution, Li Tianlan's military exploits alone were already prominent enough during the trip to East Island. After returning to Jianghu State, it was almost certain that the level of the East Emperor Palace would be adjusted upward. This was the most obvious amulet. How effective it could be depended entirely on how much the East Emperor Palace would be upgraded. That was all he had at the moment. As for the Samsara Palace, Li Tianlan could already more and more clearly perceive what the Samsara Palace was secretly planning. His identity was exposed at such an inopportune time. To some extent, it should be the result of making way for the Samsara Palace's plan. Li Tianlan would not resent or blame it. It could be seen that after seeing dawn, out of some premonition, Li Tianlan no longer regarded the Samsara Palace as his own resource. He had a vague feeling that this largest resource might not be of any help to him for a long time in the future. But the support that Sai City, the Dongqing clan, and the academics had tilted to him was enough. The only thing that made Li Tianlan uneasy was that his enemies were also beyond imagination. Not only Kunlun City, but also the Wang family of Beihai. Not to mention how many ferocious fangs were hidden behind his father's treason war. The families of the 120,000 troops who died at the border with his father's treason in that war were a force that made people's scalp numb 20 years later. Li Tianlan was expressionless. It was expected that the road ahead would be difficult, but the thorny situation still gave him a headache. After all, his identity was exposed too early. If he could have another 2 or 3 years. His eyes inadvertently swept a few teacups on the stone table, and he subconsciously shook his head. This was a gift from the Samsara Palace to him, and it could even be said to be the greatest help. A favor from nearly 1,000 special warfare elites of Jianghu State. In recent days, Li Tianlan would spare time to meet guests every day. Before the arrival of Wang Xianxia and Gong Sun Qi today, Li Tianlan chatted with several special warfare elites who owed him for saving their lives. However, how to use a favor was actually very subtle. Li Tianlan would not be so naive as to think that they really owed him their lives because he saved them. It was a matter of survival. Under the covetous eyes of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai, it would be enough for him to be satisfied if 1/10 of these nearly 1,000 people would help him at the right time. In the following time, how to carefully weave this hard-won network map had almost become the primary problem that he needed to consider. Survival, development, and rise. These 3 words were almost the future path of the East Emperor Palace. The wind and rain outside the pavilion were more and more deafening. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became firm, and his heart was dead silent. In the dark villa in front of the pavilion, the lights in the hall lit up for a moment, and then fell silent again. Li Tianlan suddenly came to his senses and got up in the pavilion full of cold night. His figure flickered slightly, and after changing places with his shadow, he had already appeared in front of the villa. The silence of all the members of the East Emperor Palace in recent days was what made Li Tianlan most gratified. His identity was exposed, so naturally, he could not hide it from Li Beitian and Ning Qianqing. Li Beitian made a lot of noise, but then he also became silent. Li Tianlan knew the consequences of his identity being exposed. How could Li Beitian and others not know? But what warmed his heart was that no one at present said that they wanted to quit the East Emperor Palace. Especially Li Beitian and Yi Huayu. Both of them came from Mount Shu, which had nothing to do with Li Tianlan. But they did not say that they wanted to quit, and Mount Shu was also silent now. The awe-inspiring and unyielding sword intent behind this silence was undoubtedly the most admirable thing about Shu Mountain. The cohesion of the East Emperor Palace began to take shape in everyone's silence. Almost everyone was meditating while healing their wounds. After many days of escape, everyone had gained a lot. Su Chu, the first brother of Jade Pool, who had just joined the East Emperor Palace but had never quit, had already begun to break through to the half-step thunder-shocking realm. Li Beitian was trying to get closer to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Now this distance was still far, but even a small step closer was good. Ning Qianqing began to try to break through to the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. Yi Huayu tried to enter the fire-flaming realm. Yu Qingyan made the slowest progress, but she was also close to the fire-flaming realm. For this little girl, whose realm was the lowest except Li Tianlan but whose lethality was second only to Li Tianlan, at least in the hearts of the people of the East Emperor Palace, no one dared to look down on her anymore. As for Dongqing Rushi, it could be said that she was the only outsider in this villa at present. But she also did not make things difficult for others. The 6th day after returning from Zhongjing to Changdao was about to pass, but for nearly a week, Dongqing Rushi had been in a coma all the time and didn't even wake up once. Horsewoman had personally checked Dongqing Rushi's condition, and the conclusion she got was not bad news. It just said that the sword seemed to consume a lot of Dongqing Rushi's mind that night. The coma was just her body protecting itself and slowly recovering. If nothing went wrong, she would wake up in 10 days. Thinking about everyone's condition in the villa, Li Tianlan opened the door of the villa and shook his head subconsciously. At present, apart from Dongqing Rushi who was in a coma, his progress was the slowest, and his meditation time was the shortest. He glanced around the hall casually, trying to see who had turned on the light just now. But when he glanced at the floor-to-ceiling window in the hall, he suddenly froze. According to Horsewoman, Dongqing Rushi, who shouldn't have woken up at this time, was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with her arms around her knees. She leaned against the armrest of the sofa and tilted her head to look at the wind and rain outside the window. She didn't seem to notice Li Tianlan coming in at all. She just sat there quietly, motionless. Her slightly messy long hair was casually draped behind her head, and she was wearing white pajamas. The light in the hall was dim, so Li Tianlan couldn't see her face clearly. At this moment, Dongqing Rushi just sat there, but she was quiet like a ghost that would disappear at any time. Li Tianlan felt something was wrong. For this fiancé who could naturally treat him as her fiancé, Li Tianlan had a very strange feeling in his heart. He couldn't tell whether he liked or disliked her. It was an indescribable feeling. Emotionally, he felt that he should get closer to her, but rationally, he felt that he should stay away from her. At least until now, he hadn't figured out how to face his fiancée who didn't seem to resist the engagement at all. Li Tianlan felt a little helpless. He casually turned on the small light on the ceiling. The dim and soft light shone down from above, and the whole hall was misty. Dongqing Rushi was still motionless, as if the wind and rain outside the window had become the thing that attracted her most. Li Tianlan instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. He subconsciously frowned and asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." A very ethereal and sweet voice sounded, but with a very obvious trace of indifference. "I slept for too long, so I came out to get some air." Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment. At this moment, he finally realized what was wrong. The Dongqing Rushi in front of him, compared with the first time he saw her in Zhongjing, was like a completely different person. She still looked the same, but her temperament changed. Elegant, melancholy, and extreme indifference. It was a kind of indifference towards everything in the world, without the slightest bit of emotion, whether it was towards others or herself. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered in the villa of the Dongqing clan, in Dongqing Rushi's room where he lived, the light gray walls that seemed to always have a gloomy and cold texture. He was in a trance, and once again remembered the first time he saw her in Zhongjing a few days ago. She was also elegant and incomparable. But the indifferent and melancholy Dongqing Rushi in front of him, and the pure and clear Dongqing Rushi that night. Which one was the real her? Li Tianlan frowned again, and for a moment, he had a feeling that he didn't know what to do. "Are you not feeling well?" Dongqing Rushi didn't move and said blandly, "Is it my attitude that made you angry? I can apologize." Cold and indifferent. She seemed to be expressing her apology, but every word that came out of her mouth caused the distance between them to grow further and further apart. That night, the girl who raised her dirty little face and took the initiative to ask him to hug her seemed to have quietly died in this stormy night, without leaving a trace. Li Tianlan felt a little sad and sorry, but he didn't know why he felt sad and sorry. "No," he said calmly. "Lying." Dongqing Rushi finally looked back. In the soft and dim light, her beautiful but pale little face was expressionless, and her eyes were like cold stars staring straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. As the light flowed, her eyes were still clear, but with a strong coldness that couldn't be melted. Li Tianlan shook his head, suppressed all kinds of thoughts in his mind, and said, "Are you hungry? You've been in a coma for a few days. Do you want to eat something? Can you cook?" Dongqing Rushi raised her delicate eyebrows and asked. "I can't." Li Tianlan shook his head. "But there's food in the fridge. You can make do with it." Dongqing Rushi curled her lips, and this time there seemed to be a trace of obvious mockery in her cold eyes. "I thought you were the kind of man who was good at making women happy, but you can't even cook. I really don't know what Qin Weibai likes about you." Li Tianlan inexplicably felt a surge of anger in his heart, and he couldn't help but retort, "I thought you were really a very pure and even cute little girl." "Little girl?" Dongqing Rushi suddenly interrupted Li Tianlan. She squinted her beautiful eyes and giggled. Her cold laughter had a kind of creepy charm that made people's scalps numb. "Yeah, little girl, how's my acting? Do you like that kind of stupid and cute type? Should I act for you?" Li Tianlan calmed down, and he suddenly smiled and said, "No need." Nodding, he turned around and planned to go upstairs directly. He still didn't hate Dongqing Rushi, but he instinctively wanted to stay away from a woman he couldn't see through. "What do you think of Rushi?" Dongqing Rushi suddenly spoke behind him. She took a step forward and reached out to grab Li Tianlan's arm. The question was a little strange, but the moment their bodies touched, Li Tianlan's body stiffened, but he didn't think much about it. He casually said, "I thought she was good before, but now you can't see through her?" Ha ha ha. It was still that kind of coquettish, crisp, but extremely cold voice. In such an environment, even if Li Tianlan had amazing willpower, he couldn't help sweating. While he was hesitating, Dongqing Rushi's delicate body seemed to stick to him. Her body was hot, but her tone was as cold as ice. "Can't see through me? Since you came in, you've looked at my legs 3 times, my breasts twice, and my face twice. My dear fiancé, what on earth can't you see through? As your fiancé, I'm very willing to satisfy your thoughts." Her voice was soft, cold, and charming. Her hot breath directly blew into Li Tianlan's ears. "My dress is not long. Can you see through me if I lift it up for you to see through me?" She was almost biting Li Tianlan's ear while talking. One of her hands held Li Tianlan's palm and slid down. She actually lifted her white nightdress by a few centimeters. His fingers touched her amazingly soft thighs. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook. He subconsciously took a few steps forward, turned around, and looked at Dongqing Rushi calmly. What? Don't you like it? Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan provocatively, or teased him. I'm still a virgin. As a fiancé, isn't it normal to serve my future man? The atmosphere became more and more strange. Li Tianlan's heart gradually beat faster. For a moment, he even felt that he had seen a ghost. But the brief touch just now, the delicate but elastic warm skin, the fresh and extremely tempting fragrance in her breath, all told him how real Dongqing Rushi was in front of him. He took a deep breath and said calmly, I'll find a chance to talk about our engagement with the old master in detail. So you mean you don't want to marry me? Dongqing Rushi, who met him for the second time, seemed to be indescribably aggressive. Her cold and charming smile slowly disappeared, and she looked at Li Tianlan coldly and asked. Li Tianlan felt a headache and kept silent. Who do you think you are? Dongqing Rushi sneered and said, God? Or the Jade Emperor? Do you know what I've done for this engagement in the past 19 years? Piano, music, dance, poetry, massage, embroidery, calligraphy, painting, cooking. I know all of these things that might make you like them. Martial arts, finance, power play, politics, psychology, and interpersonal relationships. I know all of these fields that can help you. As long as I can remember, I've known about your existence. You're my fiancé, the man who will marry me in the future. Grandpa told me about this, Grandma said it before she passed away, Dad and Mom said it, and my sister also said it. When I learned swordsmanship in Jade Pool, my teacher also said it. When I went to the Border Control Corps, my godfather also said it. He talked about it for more than 10 years. Now when I hear the word, Li, I think of Li Tianlan, and when I think of Li Tianlan, I think of my future husband. Do you know what instinct is? This is it. I can't resist myself. I've worked hard for more than 10 years, and the Dongqing clan has worked hard for more than 10 years, just to make you like me. What about you? You want to reject the engagement with just one sentence. I've lived for you for the past 19 years. Li Tianlan, who do you think you are? Do you have the right to break the engagement? Even after the cold and excited voice fell, it still lingered high and sharp. Li Tianlan stared at the cold and angry girl in front of him, and his brain was in a complete mess. That kind of indescribable shock and bitterness fiercely hit his heart and even his soul. He only knew that he had an engagement with Dongqing Rushi, but he never thought that behind this engagement, the Dongqing clan would carry it out so firmly. I've lived for you for the past 19 years. These words really had a soul-stirring power. Li Tianlan opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. You were obviously peeking at my figure just now, and now you say you don't want to marry me. Are all men so hypocritical? Dongqing Rushi asked coldly. Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed and said with a bitter smile, It's different. I admit that I peeked just now. I have to say, you're really beautiful. I'm a man, not a saint. I have desires and feelings, but desire and feelings are not the same thing. Do you understand? Dongqing Rushi bit her lip and looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes seemed to be a little wronged, but they looked colder and more stubborn. So what do you want to say? Are you going to tell me that you just want to play with me, but you don't plan to marry me? For some reason, Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment and then nodded his head. This action was so obscene, yet so honest. Dongqing Rushi was really beautiful. No one would not be tempted by such a pure and beautiful woman. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was thinking, but when he thought that she was his fiancée, he couldn't control his desire. He did want to possess this rare purity and beauty. Maybe it was the dark side of his heart. But when it came to marriage, he had never thought about it. The bride of his dream was in Huiting, in Samsara Palace, not in the Dongqing clan. Saying this might make people despise him, but at least for a second, he really thought so in his heart. You really are a bastard. Dongqing Rushi's body trembled slightly. She sneered, but her eyes stared at Li Tianlan without blinking. Even if I can accept your dirty idea for the Dongqing clan, how can you let her accept it? Who? Li Tianlan's mind was completely messed up. Who else can it be? Of course it's that stupid and cute little fool, Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi sneered. Everything in front of him was spinning. Li Tianlan's body shook, and he couldn't even stand stably. He looked at the woman in front of him, stunned. After a long silence he slowly said, Dongqing Rushi? Then who are you? Where is Dongqing Rushi? In front of him, Dongqing Rushi took a deep breath and said coldly, I'm also your fiancé. I'm Dongqing Yueshan. As for Rushi, she pointed to her head and smiled weirdly. She needs to rest. For a moment, Li Tianlan vaguely understood something, but there were still many things he didn't understand. He subconsciously lit a cigarette, and the smoke unconsciously blew to Dongqing Yueshan's face in front of him. Split personality? Li Tianlan tentatively said. Are you the other half of Rushi's personality? I should say that Rushi is my other half. Dongqing Yueshan looked cold and proud. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and took a big drag on his cigarette, silent. Dongqing Rushi had a split personality. Obviously, her main personality was the dominant one, and the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was the secondary personality. Although she had a strong sense of autonomy, if the secondary personality was the dominant one, Li Baitian and the others couldn't have missed it after days of hunting. Obviously, the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was silent most of the time, and the worst thing was that Dongqing Rushi obviously didn't know it. Li Tianlan smoked and was about to speak when the phone suddenly rang. Dongqing Yueshan was stunned. She turned around and took out her phone from the tea table. It's my grandpa, she said softly. She looked at the time, then looked at Li Tianlan. She handed over the phone and said, At this time if you answer it, Grandpa will be very happy. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he subconsciously shook his head. Dongqing Yueshan looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look, then picked up the phone and said softly, Grandpa, I'm Yueshan. There seemed to be silence on the phone for a while. Obviously, all the important figures in the Dongqing clan seemed to know the existence of Dongqing Yueshan's secondary personality, except Dongqing Rushi herself. Li Tianlan shook his head hard and didn't listen to what Dongqing Yueshan and Dongqing Hongguang said. When he came to himself, Dongqing Yueshan's call was already coming to an end. She held the phone, obviously wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, she remained silent and hung up the phone. Li Tianlan just wanted to be quiet now. When he was about to go back to his room, Dongqing Yueshan suddenly said, Grandpa asked me to tell you something. What? Li Tianlan responded subconsciously. He said. Dongqing Yueshan's big cold eyes were a little blank. She imitated Dongqing Hongguang's tone and said slowly, he said, You should be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly moved. Dongqing Yueshan spoke very slowly. Although it was a female voice, Li Tianlan could vaguely feel Dongqing Hongguang's mood when he said this. It seemed to be difficult to say? Difficult to say. Li Tianlan thought of the meeting with Gong Sun Qi just now. He frowned tightly and his heart was in a mess. Do you know Phoenix Pavilion? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Dongqing Yueshan seemed to be a little lost in thought. She subconsciously shook her head and didn't speak. Li Tianlan's heart moved. He thought of her expression just now that she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He said casually, You didn't tell the old master on the phone just now, did you? Dongqing Yueshan was slightly shocked. She hesitated. Although it was the second time she met Li Tianlan, or rather, it was the first time, the instinct instilled in her for many years seemed to make her imperfect secondary personality not know how to refuse Li Tianlan's question. She nodded, frowned and said thoughtfully, There are experts in East Island. Li Tianlan just thought it was nonsense. He said calmly, And then? No. Dongqing Yueshan shook her head and said slowly, When we were in Zhongjing that night, there were experts in the forest, experts of the invincible realm. Rushi's martial arts were all in the silent sword. Silence was unsheathed in advance, and that sword could be said to be a real invincible strike. But when that sword was unsheathed, it was pressed back together with all the sword intent. Even the broken scabbard was temporarily solidified by the sword intent. What does this mean? Li Tianlan's face looked serious, and his heart sank uncontrollably. If Dongqing Rushi's sword was really an invincible strike, then the person who completely pressed back the sword meant that he crushed that sword with his own strength. What kind of strength is this? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and subconsciously murmured to himself. I don't know. But that person that night was definitely the most powerful person I've ever seen. He didn't seem to be malicious to us, but he might not be kind either. Dongqing Yueshan shook her head and said, "The most powerful?" Li Tianlan subconsciously shook his head, somewhat disapproving. "What do you mean? Are you looking down on me?" Dongqing Yueshan's eyes suddenly became cold. "No," Li Tianlan said honestly, "but according to the frequency of your appearance, I don't think I see many people, do I? What Dongqing Rushi can see I can also see." Chapter 193. July 1st. The undercurrent that had been brewing for many days finally broke out in East Island. The storm swept through the entire East Island. In the morning of July 1st, Huating, Chen Fangqing, the Prime Minister of Jianghu State, officially held a summit of 9 countries to put great pressure on East Island to appreciate its currency. The leaders of Jianghu State, Star State, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Gaul, Snow Country, Italy, and Mountain State all rushed to Huating to attend the meeting. Almost at the same time, a large number of international financial speculators poured into the foreign exchange and futures market of East Island with unimaginable huge amount of capital. They cooperated with the political means of the summit of 9 countries to push the currency of East Island to appreciate. A large group of prominent and noble surnames appeared in the sudden currency war, shining with unparalleled dazzling light. Rothschild, Morgan, Westminster, Habsburg, the Wang family of Beihai, the Flourishing Age Fund. In just one day, the financial order of East Island became messy under the impact of a huge amount of capital. East Island, which was almost stunned, finally reacted. The crazy appreciation of East Island's currency was a devastating blow to the economy of East Island, which had not yet walked out of the economic recession. Therefore, there was no need to summon people. All the consortia of East Island and all the major banks spontaneously united together, desperately resisted, and protected the currency of East Island. The whole foreign exchange market was suddenly filled with smoke. The two sides were entangled together, and it was hard to tell who would win. This could be said to be the first currency war in recent years that was obviously premeditated. There were traces of human activity everywhere. Due to the time constraint, many of the arrangements were not very clever, but every huge flow of funds carried an irresistible momentum. East Island was fighting back desperately, and they didn't care about anything. But more and more international capital flowed into the foreign exchange market of East Island. The stalemate lasted for less than a week, and the so-called balance was instantly broken. The currency of East Island soared, even skyrocketed. After nearly a week of sleepless games, every fluctuation represented a large amount of money invested or lost, and the curve started to rise. For every financial giant that participated in this currency war, this was a feast for all of them. But for East Island, it was the end. East Island, which held a large amount of foreign exchange from Jianghu State and Star State, was completely robbed of the wealth it had accumulated for decades. The economy of the whole East Island almost collapsed. The prices in East Island were rising at an astonishing speed, and a lot of export businesses were put on hold. The bloody storm in the currency war spread like a large shadow, covering all classes in East Island. Voices of resentment filled the air, and the people were seething with resentment. In just 1 week, the currency of East Island appreciated by 1.25 times. For East Island, this was an unstoppable disaster. Although the fiercest war had passed, there were still a lot of funds pouring into East Island. Even the most famous economist in East Island said with a desperate attitude that the appreciation of East Island's currency had not come to an end. They expected that the currency of East Island would slow down when it appreciated by 2 times, and the final peak should reach about 2.5 times. If the currency of East Island appreciated by 2.5 times, it meant that tens of trillions or even more of wealth would be plundered and flowed to all over the world, and the economy of East Island would go back for at least 20 years. Under the disaster, chaos broke out in an unstoppable manner. In just half a month, countless companies and groups in East Island declared bankruptcy, and people lost their jobs every day. There were crowds in front of official institutions, and the crime rate soared. The financial groups kept putting pressure on the government while contributing money and manpower. A lot of officials fell from power for various reasons, and a lot of civilians went bankrupt overnight. The chaos was like a storm, spreading to all classes, getting worse and worse, and getting out of control. East Island, which was peaceful a few months ago, seemed to be on the verge of completely losing control. Everyone was in a terrible predicament. As the leader of the special warfare system of East Island, Shinichi Miyamoto felt especially stressed. The chaos of the special warfare system, the collapse of the currency order, and everything was interconnected. The future of East Island was dark. As the only superior of the invincible realm in East Island, Shinichi Miyamoto was facing considerable pressure almost every second. The financial groups, the cabinet, the royal family, the media. It was even said that many officials were ready to hold the Divine Wind Force accountable and ask the Divine Wind Force to give a reasonable explanation for their cowardice and incompetence. Everyone knew that the cause of all this was the fight in the Dark World. It was especially important for Jianghu State to control the special warfare system of East Island this time. As for the summit of the 9 states held in Huiting, the leaders of other countries might not follow Jianghu State's lead. But this action was extremely grand and profitable, so they didn't mind giving it a push. But it was only limited to the economic field. The fight in the Dark World was unavoidable. Many forces united and targeted each other. Now that they gathered in Chongdao, the Dark World and the economy were completely connected, and finally formed a very complicated situation. It was a stalemate and a dilemma. How to break out of this situation had become the primary problem that Shinichi Miyamoto was facing now. Fu Peak was covered with white snow. The flying wind and snow rolled over the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. Several tornado-like snow pillars rose up from the top and the bottom of the mountain, majestic and spectacular. Shinichi Miyamoto stood on the highest snow-capped peak of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, motionless like a statue. The wind and snow all over the sky surrounded his body with a cold and deathly aura. The only superior of the invincible realm in East Island had completely concentrated his spiritual force, trying his best to perceive everything around him. In his perception, the vague danger between heaven and earth was still there, and it was getting stronger and more obscure. He couldn't detect the trace of the other party. Only a faint but extremely sharp killing intent came through the wind and snow from all directions, as sharp as a knife. Shinichi Miyamoto frowned subconsciously. The snow covering him fell off one by one. He took a deep breath, and there was a trace of coldness and anger in his deep eyes. Over the past half a month, he had received countless calls. Some were from the office of the Prime Minister, some were from the royal family, and some were from various consortiums. On the phone, the tone of the other party was different. Some were calm, some were tough, and some were respectful. But the meaning was exactly the same. They hoped that he could go down the mountain and get to Chongdao as soon as possible. The current currency war was the follow-up of the conflict in the Dark World. All the dark superpowers entered Chongdao at the same time. To some extent, it was a declaration of force. And the currency war was a way for all the dark superpowers to force Chongdao to compromise. For decades, this was the crisis that East Island had never encountered. The intensity of this game was far beyond everyone's expectation. Shinichi Miyamoto couldn't imagine what would happen if East Island lost this game. In the current situation, the failure of the currency war seemed to be a matter of time. At least the possibility of winning had become infinitesimally small. So, how to win the Battle of Chongdao became the key of all. Shinichi Miyamoto was eager to go down the mountain. However, the faintly discernible danger around him kept stimulating his nerves. The opponent's concealment ability was simply unimaginable. He clearly knew that there was an enemy that was strong enough to threaten his life hiding nearby. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not lock onto the opponent's position. The other party had trapped him on Fu Peak. Shinichi Miyamoto wasn't afraid of death, but he knew that he couldn't die. Once he died, even if he was seriously injured, the situation that could still be maintained might completely collapse, and then everything would be irreversible. The wind and snow were blowing harder. The air seemed to be colder. With a heart full of depression and heaviness, Shinichi Miyamoto lifted his feet and was about to go down the mountain. Suddenly, he saw something black from the corner of his eyes. Shinichi Miyamoto turned his head subconsciously. He looked down the mountain through the howling wind and snow. At the end of his sight, a black car was slowly going up the mountain along the mountain road, getting close to the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. It was a black car that was rarely seen in the market. The body was slender, but it was indescribably broad and heavy. It was quietly driving on the mountain road, all the way up, looking elegant and steady. Shinichi Miyamoto moved the corner of his mouth as if he wanted to laugh, but his eyes were bitter. That was a car that belonged to the royal family. He quickened his pace and quickly went down the mountain. The black car went up. Shinichi Miyamoto went down. They arrived at the gate of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force almost at the same time. In the wind and snow, Shinichi Miyamoto calmly turned his body sideways and made a welcoming gesture. But the car that was about to enter the gate stopped beside him. The door opened, and a man who looked to be in his 30s got out of the car. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto in front of him and said with a soft smile, "Your Highness Miyamoto, long time no see." The man was a little short, about 1.7 meters, but his smile was very friendly. He wasn't handsome, but his outline was very soft. Standing in the wind and snow, he smiled warmly, and his whole body gave people a sense of closeness like a spring breeze. Shinichi Miyamoto was alert inside, but he still looked calm. He bowed slightly and said in a calm tone, "Your Highness, please come in." The Crown Prince of East Island, Ren Da. The only heir of the royal family of East Island, the future Mikado of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto still kept a calm and indifferent expression, but he sighed slightly in his heart. When all the social classes in East Island were about to collapse, Shinichi Miyamoto expected that someone from the royal family would come to put pressure on him. But it was Crown Prince Ren who came, which was beyond his expectation. This fully showed how dissatisfied the royal family was with his current performance. No need. Crown Prince Ren was still smiling. In the wind and snow, his face seemed to be wearing a mask that was fading away. His smile faded, and his eyes became cold. "I don't have much time. Today, my father asked me to come here and ask you, Your Highness, what do you think of the current situation in East Island?" Shinichi Miyamoto frowned. He didn't want to speak, but he had to. "Your Highness, the situation is chaotic now. I need some time." "Okay." Crown Prince Ren didn't wait for Shinichi Miyamoto to finish and said with a smile, "Of course I have time. East Island could give you time. But who could give East Island time? You must know how many forces are gathering in Chongdao, Your Highness Miyamoto, right?" Shinichi Miyamoto looked cold and didn't say a word, as if he didn't hear Crown Prince Ren's sarcasm. Fantasy World, Samsara, Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Wang family of Beihai, the Jianghu family of South America, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club. Crown Prince Ren's tone became sharper and sharper. Almost all the superpowers in the dark world have gathered in Chongdao, and some unidentified experts are also taking action. These people are either freelance mercenaries or experts who can represent the will of a country to a certain extent. Your Highness Miyamoto, do you still need time in this situation? Is 1 year enough? 10 years? Is 1 lifetime enough? Shinichi Miyamoto looked at Crown Prince Ren coldly and said in a gloomy tone, "Your Highness, please watch your tone. This is not the attitude a crown prince should have to a superior of the invincible realm. I know what you know. There are 8 superpowers in Chongdao and they have made their positions clear, but I don't think they will unite. In fact, Knights Templars is on our side, and we can fight for the position of the Jianghu family of South America. In fact, Fantasy World has already fought with the Polar Ground Alliance in Chongdao. In fact, a team of nearly 20 people from the Heroes Club died in the raid of the Dark Knights." Crown Prince Ren sneered and said, "So what? All the superpowers are enemies with each other, but their common enemy is East Island. Do you really think Knights Templars will help us? They are only after their own interests. I'm sure that once the situation is out of control, Knights Templars will deal with us first. No matter how hostile the superpowers are to each other, the most important thing for them now is the interests of East Island. Your Highness Miyamoto, I can tell you some facts. Right now, a lot of people are contacting our 3 consortiums. As for Xianxia Financial Group, Humph, this currency war gave them the best chance. Currently, more than 50% of Xianxia Financial Group's assets have been transferred overseas, in the name of being acquired, of course. Another small and medium-sized consortium also started contacting the superpowers. In the past half a month, nearly 800,000 people in East Island lost their jobs, and 9 countries announced that they would sanction our economy and trade. It's only been half a month. 1 month, half a year later, to what extent will the situation develop? At that time, whose East Island will it be? Shinichi Miyamoto's face finally changed. He knew some of the information that Crown Prince Ren said, but he didn't know some. At least, He didn't have the information about the consortiums. This shouldn't have happened. Right now, many of our consortiums and families are still supporting us, but because of your incompetence, they are about to lose confidence in the divine wind force. Your Highness Miyamoto, let's take a guess. What will they do when they lose confidence in East Island? Shinichi Miyamoto's face looked worse and worse. But once Crown Prince Ren's assumption became true, he shuddered at the thought of the consequences. He didn't want to care about Crown Prince Ren's tone anymore. There was something wrong with the intelligence of the divine wind force. He didn't expect that in such a short time, the undercurrent of East Island had become so dangerous in this storm that swept the whole territory. You know, Your Highness Miyamoto, the royals have always respected you. But your silence during this time has deeply disappointed the royals. Many people in the royals think it was a wrong decision to let you and Liuhua Palace control the divine wind force. Crown Prince Ren said blandly. Shinichi Miyamoto snorted with a gloomy face. He suppressed his anger and said slowly, "Well, Your Highness Miyamoto, you didn't come here to express your disappointment to me, did you? What instructions does the Mikado have for you?" "My father didn't give me any instructions." Crown Prince Ren shook his head and said coldly, "He just asked me to tell you something. This situation must end as soon as possible. If the divine wind force isn't capable enough, the royals and the cabinet will consider compromise." Shinichi Miyamoto's face changed dramatically. He looked at Crown Prince Ren and raised his voice, shouting, "Compromise? That's the only way." Crown Prince Ren said coldly. Shinichi Miyamoto was speechless. Of course, he knew what compromise meant. All the superpowers entered Chongdao for the right to speak in the special warfare system of East Island and the huge benefits from this dark power. If the royals compromised, it meant giving up everything in the special warfare system of East Island. From then on, the whole East Island would become a dark world without the special warfare system. A battlefield for all the dark worlds to fight against each other. In this way, it could indeed intensify the conflicts between the dark forces. But it was easier to invite them in than to send them away. Once the special warfare system of East Island disappeared, it would be almost impossible to rebuild it under the eyes of the dark forces. Even if it could be rebuilt, it would take countless years. And during this time, without the special warfare power, East Island wouldn't be able to fight unless a full-scale war broke out. And, if they compromised, Shinichi Miyamoto himself would definitely become a bargaining chip. The superiors of the invincible realm were indeed important, but in front of the general trend, they were just non-entities. "We can't compromise." Shinichi Miyamoto gritted his teeth and said coldly. "The consequences of compromise are really serious." Crown Prince Ren said calmly, "But the consequences of not compromise are more serious. The special warfare system will be destroyed, the economy of East Island will collapse, all the consortiums will betray East Island, and foreign funds will control the will of East Island and run amok. At least for now, we can't afford the consequences, can we? It's better to negotiate with them and compromise. Then, at least we can control something that belongs to us." Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said coldly, "Even if we compromise, who do you want to talk to? The Summit of 9 Nations. Is it?" Crown Prince Ren glanced at Shinichi Miyamoto and said casually, "Of course we want to talk to Jianghu State." Shinichi Miyamoto kept silent, but he gradually understood the plan of the royals. A large number of elite superiors of East Island and 2 superiors of the Invincible Realm were trapped in Jianghu State. If the royals compromised, those people would naturally become bargaining chips. After East Island compromised, the special warfare system would be annexed by Jianghu State, and its economy would suffer a heavy blow, but it could barely stabilize itself. Most importantly, if East Island gave up on these, it could bring all the superiors trapped in Jianghu State back to East Island. By then, Liuhua Palace might become the sacrifice of compromise, but Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace would still exist, and there was still a glimmer of hope to take back the special warfare system of East Island in the future. This process might take decades, but for the current East Island, as long as there was hope, it was good. And these decades would also be conducive to Jianghu State's continued expansion in the Dark World and maintaining its position as the world overlord. More importantly, Kunlun City. If Jianghu State occupied the special warfare system of East Island, the power of Kunlun City would definitely be the most important. And there might be something that could not be negotiated between East Island and Gu Xingyun. Before Li Kuangtu, the superior of the Invincible Realm in Jianghu State, committed treason, Gu Xingyun and East Island had a negotiation. After that war, didn't it lead to more than a decade of peace and stability? Until this moment, Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly realized that if East Island persisted, it would be a bottomless abyss ahead of them. But if they retreated, there would be leeway everywhere. Of course, it would be best if they could win. But if they couldn't, compromise was the best way to deal with the worst situation. And the price, specifically for individuals, was Shinichi Miyamoto's own life and the survival of Liuhua Palace. Shinichi Miyamoto's heart kept sinking. The cold wind and snow on few peaks seemed to penetrate his body, chilling him to the bone. But his eyes gradually became determined. 7 days. After a short silence, Shinichi Miyamoto finally opened his mouth. His body gradually straightened up in the wind and snow, and the extremely sharp killing intent instantly spread out. The wind and snow between heaven and earth suddenly began to gather around his body. Shinichi Miyamoto stood where he was, but his body was like an indomitable spirit, with a kind of indifference that looked down on the world. Tell His Majesty the Mikado that I will solve everything in Chongdao within 7 days. He paused and then continued, East Island will never compromise. Under such a momentum, Crown Prince Rend, who was aggressive just now, seemed to be a little inferior. He took a deep look at Shinichi Miyamoto, nodded and said, 7 days? I will tell my father. Besides, I will go to Chongdao with Your Highness. Your Highness, are you going to join the war too? Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was still indifferent. Of course. Crown Prince Ren said calmly, if we can fight, who will compromise? This war concerns the fate of East Island, as well as our life and death. He bowed deeply to Shinichi Miyamoto and said respectfully, Your Highness Miyamoto, please take care of me. Take care of each other. Crown Prince Rend nodded, turned around, got in the car and left. Shinichi Miyamoto still stood where he was, in the wind and snow. He didn't turn around until the black car left his sight. He said flatly, Come out. I've made up my mind. Chapter 194. The last cloud of snow flew up to the sky with a resolute voice. Dusk fell on Fuyong Peak. The flying snow stopped. A vague and illusory figure had appeared in front of Shinichi Miyamoto. Cooperate. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto and asked with a chuckle. In front of the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, all the snowflakes were strangely suspended in the air within a radius of 100 meters, motionless. The cold wind that pervaded the mountains seemed to have completely disappeared. Within a radius of 100 meters, it was like a silent and still world. Shinichi Miyamoto stood where he was, letting the opponent's domain cover him completely. His eyes grew cold and he said in a mocking tone, Of course I want to cooperate. But, is this your sincerity? The domain that covered the wind and snow shrank a little, but it was more condensed. The shadow in front of Shinichi Miyamoto was almost invisible in the night. It was vague and sometimes visible, but it carried a sharp killing intent. Facing Shinichi Miyamoto's mockery, the illusory shadow smiled and said softly, Your Mikado is very bold, and so is His Highness Miyamoto. But I'm not. In the territory of the Divine Wind Force, it's always good to be cautious, isn't it? A cold light flashed in Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes. He said blandly, You heard my conversation with Crown Prince Rend. Yes. In 7 days, you have to completely solve everything in East Island. With all due respect, it's almost impossible for you to do it according to the current situation. It's impossible for you to fight against the general trend that can crush a country on your own. The Black Shadow's tone was cold. Shinichi Miyamoto was not angry. He just stood there quietly and thought for a while. Then he said blandly, What if we cooperate? It's the general trend. No one can do anything about it. The most we can do is reduce the loss. The Black Shadow's body became clearer in the still domain. If we cooperate, no matter how bad the result is, the special warfare system of East Island won't be removed from the Dark World forever. Shinichi Miyamoto was silent, as still as a statue. His Highness Miyamoto, I'm here with full sincerity to cooperate with you. You've imprisoned me for many days. Facing the current situation, haven't you made up your mind? The cold and creepy voice of the Black Shadow continued. Shinichi Miyamoto just sneered. At the very least, Shinichi Miyamoto treated the word imprisoned as bullshit. Evil, who ranked third on the divine list in the Dark World, was the top killer in the Dark World. He might die, but how could he be imprisoned? Shinichi Miyamoto knew that he did not have the ability to imprison an invincible realm expert who ranked higher than him on the holy list. However, Evil had been in the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force recently. He was so quiet that he didn't look like the strongest killer in the Dark World. Shinichi Miyamoto was lost in thought. That day, Evil came to the Divine Wind Force and invited him to kill Li Tianlan. He kept saying that it was for the overall situation. At that time, Evil did not agree, but neither did he refuse. He just used consideration as an excuse to invite Evil to stay in the Divine Wind Force and discuss it. Originally, he did not take the invitation seriously, but he did not expect that Evil actually stayed for many days. Evil did not urge him to do anything. Until today, when he had no choice, Evil appeared in front of him calmly. It was as if the other party had already predicted that he would encounter today's situation. Shinichi Miyamoto's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said, "When you invited me to kill Li Tianlan, who's your employer?" Evil's figure became illusory again. He was standing in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, but his whole body seemed to be wrapped in mist. No one could see his face or figure clearly. Although His Highness Miyamoto is a ninja, don't tell me that you don't even know the basic rules of a killer? The most basic rule of a killer was not to expose any information about the employer. Shinichi Miyamoto was calm and collected. He had gradually figured out some things, and he was more confident in his heart. Now he needed to cooperate with Evil. Evil also needed his help. Otherwise, with his strength, he could kill Li Tianlan. No matter how powerful Li Tianlan was, he would have died hundreds of times. Besides, the commission alone cost him hundreds of millions. It was not difficult to find Li Tianlan's whereabouts in East Island, and Evil would never lack opportunities to kill Li Tianlan. As for the revenge of Samsara after Li Tianlan's death, it would indeed make Evil worry. But if he was really afraid, he wouldn't have accepted the deal. Shinichi Miyamoto became calmer and calmer. He was almost sure that the reason why Evil was still here was that he had something that Evil needed. "What do you want?" Shinichi Miyamoto asked in a low voice. He didn't ask what Evil could give him. Once they cooperated, at least Evil would be on their side. The combat capability of an invincible realm expert was a priceless treasure in a critical moment. Even if Divine Wind Force didn't have any help except Evil, East Island would have to pay a high price for Evil alone. "I want Yata no Kagami." Evil was silent for a while, and then he said in a calm and serious tone. Shinichi Miyamoto's face suddenly changed. Since Evil showed up, this was the first time he showed real anger and killing intent. "Do you know what you're talking about?" Shinichi Miyamoto said in a cold voice. Yata no Kagami, one of the legendary mirror jade swords of East Island, was the symbol of the power of the Mikado, and was also one of the 3 legendary divine weapons of East Island. Most people thought that the legend was just a legend, but only a few people knew that the mirror jade swords of East Island did exist, and they were indeed divine weapons. But this divine weapon didn't have any earth-shattering lethality. To some extent, the 3 divine weapons were even more fragile than the most common porcelain. But the existence of the 3 divine weapons was really related to the fate of the country. Fate seemed mysterious, but it was fixed since ancient times. Fate, destiny, and fixed number. In that unknown or barely understood field, there was a hidden power that everyone was in awe of. It didn't seem to exist, but it was everywhere. And the 3 divine weapons of East Island stored the fate of the country of East Island. The 3 divine weapons symbolized the power of the royals. When the special warfare system of East Island was first established and before Wuji Palace was founded, the Mikado gave Yata no Kagami and Kusanagi to Lyohua Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School respectively, and Yasukani no Magatama was placed in the headquarters of Divine Wind Force, which represented the absolute control of the special warfare system of East Island by the royals. After the establishment of Wuji Palace, the Mikado gave Yasukani no Magatama to Tianhai Wuji. Now the 3 divine weapons belonged to the 3 major schools, which regarded them as their lives. The royals didn't seem to have any real power in recent years, but the special warfare system was the most fundamental thing of the royals. That was why Shinichi Miyamoto lost his composure when he learned that the royals were going to use the special warfare system as a bargaining chip. It could be seen how miserable the Mikado was when he made this decision. But even if it was a compromise, Even if the Mikado gave up Lyohua Palace and the special warfare system temporarily, he couldn't give up Yata no Kagami, the divine weapon that controlled the fate of the country. Evil asked for Yata no Kagami, which was crazy. Shinichi Miyamoto heaved a sigh of relief. Vaguely, he seemed to see a black hand taking advantage of the situation. In the chaotic situation, the Black Hand directly reached into the most inviolable area of East Island through evil. Black Hand. This code name, Black Hand. Shinichi Miyamoto's body shook violently. He suddenly guessed who evil's employer was. In the whole dark world, there was only one family that was most obsessed with fate. The Jianghu family of South America. The behemoth that almost dominated Jianghu state. Shinichi Miyamoto suppressed his intense emotions and said coldly, "This is not something I can decide. But you should know very well that we can't give you Yata no Kagami no matter what." Evil was silent for a while, and his tone became solemn. "Maybe you should listen to what we can give you." "No need." Shinichi Miyamoto rudely interrupted him and said coldly, "This is not something I can decide. A murderous weapon. Besides me, there is also an invincible realm expert and a half-step invincible realm expert. These bargaining chips are only for 1 month of Yata no Kagami. Just 1 month. We are just borrowing it. Can't His Highness Miyamoto make a decision with such conditions? Borrowing. For any high-level official of East Island, this was an extremely sensitive word. Back then, the Wang family of Beihai also borrowed their big island of Beihai. But for hundreds of years, they had no intention of returning it, and there was no possibility of returning it. If the Jianghu family of South America was really behind evil. But in this situation, evil's bargaining chip was tempting enough. If they could make a deal, then East Island would have 3 superiors of the invincible realm and a murderous weapon. It was like sending charcoal in the snowy weather. I can understand why you hesitated at the beginning. When Li Kuangtu committed treason, East Island was one of the biggest beneficiaries, wasn't it? Li Tianlan is also from the Li family. Maybe you want to. Oh, your plan is good, but now you have no conditions to implement it. Cooperating with us is your only choice. After all, we are the only ones who can help you get through this. Evil's illusory figure became clearer and clearer, and his tone became more sincere. Is Li Tianlan related to Yata no Kagami? Shinichi Miyamoto asked. To be exact, both Yata no Kagami and Li Tianlan are related to us. Coveting the divine weapon of East Island, Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "The Jianghu family of South America is really bold." The wind and snow in the sky suddenly quieted down. Evil's eyes instantly condensed like divine light. Shinichi Miyamoto said to himself, "You and the Jianghu family of South America are not simply employers, right?" The Jianghu family. I know Jiang Chensong. I know Jiang Chenyan with the code name Black Hand. What about you? Or should I call you Third Master Jiang? Evil looked at Shinichi Miyamoto with cold eyes. After a long time he said blandly, "What's the point of saying this? Miyamoto, my offer is good enough. We both take what we need. If you don't agree, I need to add one more condition." Shinichi Miyamoto said quickly, "East Island's economy is in trouble now, if..." "There is no if." Evil shook his head. "At present, the Jiang family has no extra funds to support you, nor is it obliged to. Our cooperation is limited to the dark world, that's all." Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep look at Evil and nodded coldly. The fact that the Jiang family didn't have extra funds meant a lot. For a giant like the Jiang family, its liquidity was definitely an astronomical figure, but now it didn't have extra funds. There was no doubt that the Jiang family's funds were also wreaking havoc on the economy of East Island. Somehow, Shinichi Miyamoto seemed to know where the 2 mysterious funds that almost destroyed the economy of East Island came from. At least one of them probably belonged to the Jiang family. An ally of the dark world. An economic enemy. The Yata no Kagami is very important. I have to report it to His Majesty the Mikado. Shinichi Miyamoto said blandly, "Before that, I can't give you any answer." "Then do it as soon as possible. You only have 7 days, and you can't afford to delay it." Evil chuckled and said. Shinichi Miyamoto seemed to have made up his mind. He said calmly, "Then let's go now. You and I go down the mountain. I'll talk to His Majesty the Mikado." He took a deep breath, calmly concentrated, and left the headquarters of the divine wind force as fast as he could. Evil froze for a second, and then followed him. The white snow and the icy wind whistled past. Shinichi Miyamoto became more and more nervous, and he instinctively guarded against everything around him. The divine wind force was getting farther and farther behind him. When Shinichi Miyamoto stepped on the snow line, the sense of danger that had been lingering in his heart for days finally faded away. Shinichi Miyamoto let out a sigh of relief, and then he realized that he was soaked in cold sweat. That unimaginable sense of oppression and lethal threat was simply inconceivable. Shinichi Miyamoto walked down the mountain with a gloomy face, and then he said goodbye to evil at the foot of the mountain. One of them went straight to the Imperial Palace. One of them went straight to the airport. Under the night sky, evil squinted and watched Shinichi Miyamoto's figure disappear from his sight. After a long time he took out his phone, dialed a number, and said calmly, he agreed. Very good. On the phone, a calm and steady voice rang out. This is a disaster for East Island, but it's an opportunity for us. You must kill Li Tianlan as soon as possible with the Yata no Kagami no Kagami. Evil agreed and was about to turn around. On Fu Peak, an earth-shattering bang suddenly spread in the dim night sky. The completely violent killing intent almost filled the whole Fu Peak. The original location of the Divine Wind Force's headquarters was suddenly as bright as day in the night sky. The crazy twisting airflow directly tore the snow-capped peak, and a large amount of flying snow rose up like a sky curtain. Vaguely, the whole headquarters of the Divine Wind Force was shaking. The violent killing intent rose to the extreme in an instant, and the twisting airflow was completely shattered. The sky curtain made of snow was torn by the killing intent, and the aura of death spread and disappeared. The flying snow fell to the ground, and the sudden killing intent disappeared in an instant, leaving no trace. In a trance, the explosion at that moment seemed to tear the heaven and earth. Evil suddenly froze on the spot. The corner of his mouth twitched. He held the phone and said with a bitter smile, the Divine Wind Force was attacked, and the opponent is an expert, a real expert. If I'm not wrong, this style should be Tribulation's Divine Wind Force in this situation. Forget it, brother. We 3 invincible realm experts should be in place as soon as possible. It's not 3. On the phone, the calm voice was silent for a second, and then said coldly, it's 4. On the same day, almost at the same time, when the general trend began to focus and completely break out in East Island. Storms also broke out in Northern Europe and North America. In North America, the branch of Knights Templars was raided almost unprepared. The raiders were divided into several forces and almost wiped out all the strongholds of Knights Templars in North America in one day. And the branch of Fantasy World in Northern Europe was even more chaotic. Dark Knights, Knights Templars, Samsara, Heroes Club, big and small forces directly broke out in the fiercest melee under the guidance of a mysterious force. All the forces of Fantasy World were directly removed from Northern Europe before anyone had time to react. After the fierce battle, this mysterious force that seemed to have been lurking for a long time started to sort out all kinds of resources as soon as possible. The headquarters of Fantasy World in North America could do nothing about what happened in Northern Europe. The headquarters of Knights Templars in Northern Europe could do nothing about what happened in North America. At this time, a large number of elites of these 2 forces were deeply trapped in Jianghu State or Changdao. Although the forces left in the headquarters were not weak, the major branches were extremely empty. When the 2 invincible realm experts attacked at the same time, they were immediately defeated. But the local officials did not make any sound. They had a completely indifferent attitude. On this day, the name of the Snow Dance Corps shone through the whole dark world. On this day, Situ Tsungyue and Gu Qianchuan also officially appeared in Northern Europe and North America. The whole dark world was in turmoil. Almost all of the dark forces started to move. Some people still rushed to Changdao. But some people began to rush to Northern Europe and North America. The general trend was still gathering in East Island, but the storm had swept through the whole dark world. East Island, North America, Northern Europe. There were opportunities and interests everywhere in the 3 battlefields. There were more than 3 battlefields. As the Snow Dance Corps surfaced, everyone knew that the 4th battlefield was about to appear. Huiting. Jianghu State. Everyone in the dark world was moving. They had to move. Under the general trend, even the superiors of the invincible realm were like non-entities. If they couldn't advance, they would die. Who could retreat unscathed? Chapter 195. Dark Night, Heavy Rain, Long Street, Old House. The continuous heavy rain for many days still showed no signs of stopping. Heavy rain fell from the sky to the ground. The water on the long street had not been cleared, but new rain had begun. The continuous and violent rain covered the whole Dongdu. The gloomy and desolate atmosphere permeated every corner of the city with the dark night and heavy rain. It was cold and depressing, as if the end of the world was coming. The old house was located in the southwest edge of Dongdu, which was infinitely close to Shanghai. Dongdu did not have suburbs in the conventional sense, so even though it was on the edge, it was still prosperous. But prosperity was relative. If this block, this long street, was the poorest place in Dongdu, perhaps even the locals who lived here could not refute it. There were no entertainment places on the long street, and only a few shops were closed early. The roadside streetlights flashed gloomily in the heavy rain. The light fell on the ground, and the water kept rippling, flashing bleakly. It was still a scene of tens of thousands of lights, but the scene looked a little desolate. At the end of the long street was darkness. The nearby streetlights had been completely damaged because of years of disrepair, and there were some potholes on the road. The old house, which occupied a large area but looked really unflattering, was located here. Under the heavy rain, it was completely dark, completely isolated from the whole world. It seemed that even the sound of the rain falling here was a little smaller. Silently, two pure white figures suddenly appeared at the entrance of the old house. The two figures stood on the left and right sides of the door of the old house, and then they did not move. The darkness obscured their appearances, only revealing the silhouettes of two human figures. Perhaps because the light was too dark, the two white figures that suddenly appeared at the door looked dazzling and strange. Muffled thunder rolled in the sky above. The pale lightning tore the sky in an instant, and the bright arc of light fell from the ninth heaven to the lowest place, completely illuminating everything around the old house for a moment. White clothes, white shoes, and white gloves. Two different but handsome and almost enchanting faces appeared in the darkness, and finally returned to the darkness. It's almost time. Amidst the rumbling of the rain in the darkness, a man in white suddenly spoke. His voice was so soft that it was almost cold, but his soft voice was extremely clear in the heavy rain. It's time. The other man in white said simply. The two fell silent again, motionless. Another bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. In front of the old house, the violent rain, the white people, the dark night, and the dilapidated door were all completely illuminated. In the light and shadow, the whole old house looked like a pure and depressing black and white painting. Bright lights lit up just before the thunder roared. In the rain, a black car drove steadily into the long street, heading towards the dilapidated old house. The two men in white looked at each other. In the darkness, their gazes suddenly focused. The car finally stopped in front of the old house. While the two men in white were still hesitating, the driver in the driver's seat had already jumped out of the car, pulled out the umbrella that was placed in the car door, and jogged to the back of the car. It was an extremely tall white woman. She was nearly 1.9 meters tall and had fair skin. Although her appearance was slightly ordinary, her figure was voluptuous and sexy. She didn't seem to see the two people in white standing at the entrance of the old house at all. She held an umbrella and quickly opened the back door of the car. She covered the roof of the car with the umbrella and waited quietly. Because the umbrella was tilted forward, the rain quickly soaked half of the woman's body, but her expression did not change at all. Her every move was smooth and natural, but revealed a kind of reverence and humility from the bottom of her heart. The two men in white looked at each other again, feeling a little ridiculous. Shadowless Shadow, one of the 12 supermasters of Samsara. Among all the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, she was a figure worthy of attention. Shadowless Shadow's strength was speed, and she was good at surprise attacks. Born in snow country, she was tall, but her movements were like a storm, and her momentum was fierce and hard to capture. In the whole dark world, she was a famous figure, and also one of the supermasters of Samsara with the highest exposure. Before today, the two men in white had never thought that the dignified supermaster of Samsara would act like a servant in the presence of outsiders, and he did it willingly. It was silent in the car. The two men in white watched quietly. Although they had not seen the main character, they felt the arrogance. The arrogance of being high and mighty. A slender and elegant leg was the first to stick out of the car, and the black high heels stepped on the wet ground softly and firmly. The tall woman walked out of the car, stood under the umbrella, and looked around casually. The wind and rain were still the same, and the darkness was still the same. But in an instant, there was suddenly a touch of dreamy light in front of the old house, which was like a black and white picture. She was wearing a black suit, black tights, and black high heels. Her long, smooth hair was casually combed into a ponytail. Her dreamlike, exquisite face was calm and cold, like the clouds and moon in the sky. In the darkness, her whole body seemed to be glowing, with a kind of dazzling and sharp light. Perfect, noble, exquisite, dreamy, proud, cold. Different temperaments seemed to have fused together in the most thorough way, completely natural and without the slightest flaw. The eyes of the two men in white, who were no longer young, showed a little trance at the same time. This was the first time they saw this extraordinary woman in the dark world, the extraordinary woman who was regarded as a goddess by countless people. She suddenly appeared in the dark world in an extremely high-profile way. In recent years, behind every event in the dark world, there seemed to be her figure flashing, either in the light or in the dark, with peerless beauty. This light, slightly white, since it appeared, burst out the brightest light in the darkest world. Her beauty was like a poem or jade. This was a woman who should not be in Dongdu at this time, but now she was standing in front of the unknown old house. Qin Wei Bai. Wait for me in the car. With a cold and soft voice, Qin Wei Bai took the umbrella from Shadowless and stepped up the steps in front of her. Boss! Shadowless called out subconsciously. The clear sound of high heels on the steps paused. Qin Wei Bai held the umbrella and chuckled. It's okay. Wait for me. The two men in white at the door had already stepped forward at the same time and said with a smile, Welcome, Boss Qin. His Highness has been waiting for you in the house. Qin Wei Bai nodded and didn't say anything to them. She held the umbrella and walked into the gate of the old house. In the creaking sound that seemed to show the traces of time, the gate opened and closed. The two men in white still stood there motionless. In the darkness, in front of Shadowless, dawn broke. The inside and outside of the old house were basically the same. This was indeed not a luxurious or comfortable place. The mottled walls, uneven ground, and every brick and tile, every blade of grass and tree of the old house exuded a strong ancient aura. Stepping on the flagstone road in the courtyard, Qin Wei Bai went directly to the living room, the only light on. Although the old house was shabby, it was not small. In the rain, Qin Wei Bai was the only one walking quietly for dozens of meters. The sound of high heels hitting the flagstone was clear. The deep night, the violent rain, and the old courtyard. The power of time silently shattered the four walls of memory. Under the irresistible general trend, the whole world seemed to have only a predestined destiny. Qin Wei Bai's eyes were in a trance, and she walked all the way. Through the courtyard, her figure stopped in front of the front hall. Through the stained glass, it seemed that a man was sitting in the room. Qin Wei Bai took a deep breath. Her somewhat dazed eyes regained focus little by little. They became cold, sharp, and rational. She put away the umbrella. Qin Wei Bai pushed the door and entered. This was a large front hall. Perhaps the interior decoration was too simple, so it looked very spacious. Lights that were not very bright fell into the hall, leaving large shadows where the light could not reach. On the sofa in the center, a man sat with his back to Qin Wei Bai, his head bowed. He seemed to be reading a book. There was no picture on the TV, no tea on the coffee table, and no temperature on the air conditioner. The whole front hall was dead silent except for the sound of Qin Wei Bai opening the door. Qin Wei Bai calmly clenched her fists and slowly walked into the front hall. The thin high heels hit the ground clearly, ethereal and dreamy. The man sitting on the sofa seemed to hear the sound. He stood up casually, turned his head and said with a faint smile, Boss Qin, welcome. This was a very simple man. Simplicity was not all about temperament, but also about appearance. The man looked to be in his 40s. He was not very tall and burly. His figure was slightly ordinary, and his facial features were even more ordinary. But no matter who saw him for the first time, they couldn't say that he was an ordinary person. It was because he was simple. This was an indescribable feeling. He was too quiet and too clear, but every move he made was filled with the charm of the great Tao. He stood up casually and spoke calmly. There was nothing superfluous in his words or actions. But there was a kind of unparalleled power. Simple and peaceful, unfathomable. This was the first time that Qin Weibai couldn't see a person clearly. The other party seemed to put everything in front of her. He had no advantages, but also no weaknesses. The world was like a picture scroll. The other party didn't choose to synchronize himself with the picture scroll, but hid behind the picture scroll, clear and blurry. This was a person. It was a very absurd evaluation. But it was Qin Weibai's most clear feeling. This was a person, the most real person without disguise. And without self. Qin Weibai frowned slightly and stared at the man in front of her seriously with her watery and dreamy eyes. She seemed to be thinking about something, as if she wanted to see through something. Her approach was so obvious, and there was no concealment. "What are you thinking, Boss Qin?" The man slightly raised his eyebrows. He still had a plain face, but with his movements, his whole person suddenly had a kind of indescribable spirit. It was that every corner of his body was flying with arrogance and fierce momentum, as if he was extremely disdainful of everything in the world and didn't care about it at all. Arrogance. This was the real arrogance. "Weibai greets your highness." Qin Weibai came to her senses, bowed very elegantly, and chuckled softly. "I'm wondering what kind of person your highness is. I've observed you for a long time, but I haven't been able to get the answer." "A long time? Is a minute a long time?" The man smiled disapprovingly, reached out and said, "Sit down. It's been a long time." Qin Weibai said blandly, sat down on the sofa and asked, "How should I address you, your highness?" "I haven't decided yet." The man thought seriously for a while, and then said self-mockingly, "No one has called me by my name for a long time. It's been many years. Call me Boss Qin." "How should I address you many years ago, your highness?" Qin Weibai sat quietly on the sofa and asked lightly. Her expression was as calm as the misty rain, but there seemed to be needles hidden in her bright eyes, sharp and fierce. "I forgot." The man's tone was indifferent. Qin Weibai took a deep look at him and seemed to lose interest in asking more questions. She went straight to the point and said, "Let's get down to business. The general trend of East Island has been established. Your Highness, what do you think of our cooperation?" "My opinion hasn't changed." The man raised the corner of his mouth and said slowly, "Now we are ready and can act at any time. And I got the news 10 minutes ago that Shinichi Miyamoto has gone to the Imperial Palace of East Island and made a promise to the Mikado. Within 7 days, he will solve everything in Chongdao. Only 7 days. In other words, the final battle has begun." Qin Weibai's eyes, which were as bright as the Milky Way, grew brighter. She nodded thoughtfully. The fact that Shinichi Miyamoto entered the Imperial Palace and made a promise to the Mikado was definitely a top secret. At least not many people were present, and they were all very important figures. But under such circumstances, the Highness in front of her could still get the information, which was enough to show that his power in East Island had reached a terrifying level. Qin Weibai's heart was a little heavy. Was an overly powerful ally really good for the general trend? Maybe. "Why me?" the man suddenly asked, looking at Qin Weibai, who was deep in thought. Facing the stunning beauty, his eyes were still calm and clear. He didn't even have a little bit of appreciation, let alone amazement. Qin Weibai seemed to be in a trance. Hearing this, she didn't stop and said indifferently, "Because of your past." "Past? I don't have a past. Even if I do, it has nothing to do with me. I am me." The man smiled with interest and said, "You seem to know me? It was Samsara who took the initiative to cooperate with us this time. You seem to know the so-called past. Interesting. As I said, there's nothing wrong with our cooperation this time, but it's hard for me to treat Samsara as my friend. I don't believe they will help me for no reason. I seem to have gotten too much from this cooperation. Your Highness, you just need to remember your promise," Qin Weibai said in a soft tone. "Protect Li Tianlan?" The man couldn't help laughing. "I know. He's the current successor of the Li family in Jianghu state, right? Do you think he can rebuild the Li family and turn it into a god of war family again?" He paused, kept his smile and said softly, "Do you think he can? Does he deserve it?" When he said this, the man's eyes sparkled with stubbornness. Does he really deserve it? Qin Weibai also smiled. It was a very elegant and calm smile. In this state, Qin Weibai was really devastatingly beautiful. Every frown and smile had a soul-stirring charm. However, with her smile, her eyes became a little cold, as if someone had offended her most beloved thing. No matter who she faced, she had a reason to persist. Tianlon is my man. Qin Weibai looked at the man in front of her and said word by word, Your Highness, do you deserve to judge my man? The atmosphere in the hall suddenly froze. The smile on the man's face disappeared. The man's smile became colder and colder, and finally became expressionless. Qin Weibai remained calm and collected. She just stared at the man without backing down. Her eyes were as sharp as a knife. You're really arrogant. After a long time, the man took a deep breath and said with a cold smile, But you have to remember, this is not Samsara Palace. Your palace master is seriously injured and powerless. At least when you face me, an expert of the invincible realm, you have to maintain the minimum respect. You're not qualified to judge my man. It's a fact. Qin Weibai said blandly, and a mocking smile gradually appeared on her delicate and dreamy face. As for the invincible realm, Your Highness, you have the combat capability of the invincible realm, but are you really in the invincible realm? Are you really invincible like this? The man's eyes suddenly condensed to the extreme, and all the clarity and softness in his eyes disappeared in an instant. The whole old house was filled with thick and cold killing intent. The killing intent surged and gathered. On the sofa, Qin Weibai's face was pale, but she did not move. She still looked at the man in front of her with extreme arrogance. It seems that you know a lot. The endless killing intent suddenly disappeared. The man nodded, narrowed his eyes and said, If it weren't for... I really want to kill you. Qin Weibai was silent. The man stood up from the sofa and took 2 steps before continuing. Do you know how much I hate you? Hate? Qin Weibai asked. You know the reason. Since you can appear here, don't tell me you don't know the cause and effect. The man's tone was cold, but there was more or less a trace of helplessness in this cold tone. Qin Weibai seemed to understand something. This time, she smiled sincerely and happily. I can understand. But you're not a fish. How can you know the joy of fish? What's more, this matter is not about whether individuals are wronged or not. At least it's a good thing for the collective. The man was silent. After a long time he said blandly, My overall situation has nothing to do with the individual or the collective. Hate is hate. Qin Weibai nodded with a smile and softly threatened, If that's the case, Your Highness, I still advise you to change your mind. Otherwise, I may do more things to make you hate in the future. This time, the man did not have killing intent. He just sighed helplessly and bitterly. What on earth do you want? He asked. I've said, I just want Tianlon to be safe. Qin Weibai said softly, The general trend is unpredictable. Your Highness, please. She bent her proud and straight back and bowed deeply to the man in front of her. Respectfully. The man looked at Qin Weibai quietly with a complicated look in his eyes. People like you are a madman, Yizichen said. He looked at Qin Weibai and whispered, There's only Li Tianlon in your heart. You don't care about anything. As long as he's fine, you don't care about the halo others give you. You're willing to lower yourself to me for him, but if something happens to him, I can imagine how crazy you'll be for revenge. Am I right? Of course. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, After all, you promised me. Love to the extreme is madness. The man whispered to himself, his eyes in a trance. If your highness has never been crazy, how can you empathize with my position? Qin Weibai said calmly, Are you unwilling to accept what happened in the past? Regret? No. The man interrupted Qin Weibai and said coldly, Li Tianlon, I'll try my best. Not try your best. Qin Weibai insisted, It's a must. Not to mention how much this cooperation will benefit you, even these years. Your Highness, have you never thought about who you owe the most? Oh. The man suddenly laughed. Obviously he was no longer young, but once he was arrogant, his whole body was frivolous. Who do I owe? You should ask who owes me the most. Qin Weibai's body shook. Her face, which had been tit for tat with the man, suddenly became pale. There was no trace of blood on it. That was indescribable despair and sadness. Her lips moved, and she slowly lowered her head, which had always been high. At this moment, Qin Weibai's sharpness was gone, leaving only indescribably delicate. "I'm sorry," she murmured to herself, her voice faint. "What?" The man turned his head, looking surprised. Qin Weibai trembled and suddenly came to her senses. She said calmly, "It's nothing." Her cold eyes gradually became hot. Finally it became downright crazy. "Protect Tianlon." She looked at the man in front of her and said word by word, "You must do it. If something happens to him, the person who killed him will die. Your Highness, you will die too." The man wanted to retort, but when he saw the madness in Qin Weibai's eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and nod. This plan has already affected the overall situation. The Dark Knights, Knights Templars, the Heroes Club, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Wang family of Beihai. So many superpowers are involved. Jianghu State has angered several superpowers in the Dark World, but after this plan, you will also anger Jianghu State. Boss Qin, is it worth it? You should know what the consequences will be. Qin Weibai looked at him calmly and said blandly, Jianghu State has already become a power. Although it's weak now, Kunlun City can't do whatever it wants. When Tianlon returns to Jianghu State, it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. The man's heart trembled for no reason, and he shook his head silently. Until now, she was still thinking about Li Tianlon. As for herself, when did she ever think about it? She would completely devote her life, faith, and even her soul to a man. She would rather be smashed to pieces and be the enemy of the whole world. How terrifying was this madness? "I'll leave for Changdao immediately." The man nodded and his tone was firm. "I'll go to Changdao too." Qin Weibai nodded. "Are you going to see Li Tianlon?" the man asked with a smile. Qin Weibai shook her head and said softly, "It's better not to see him." The man took a deep look at Qin Weibai, feeling the determination in those 4 words. For the first time, there was real respect in his eyes. Besides money and power, force and wisdom could change history. But there was also madness. The man chuckled and said in a sincere tone, "None of us know which will come first, tomorrow or an accident. The world is like a storm, and people are like candlelight under the rain. They can be extinguished at any time, because we never know what will happen in the next second. But I can promise you that this time, I'll try my best to protect Li Tianlon. That's my respect for your persistence." "Thank you." Qin Weibai nodded, turned around, and walked out of the door without hesitation. When she was about to go out, she suddenly stopped. With her back to the man behind her, she said blandly, "If the world is really a storm, when you go out in the storm, you will die a good death." The man behind her laughed wildly, unruly, and indifferent. Outside the window, the rain was heavy. End of Volume 2. Chapter 196. Changdao looked calmer and calmer. The currency war ravaged the entire East Island. Everyone's attention seemed to be attracted by the sudden outbreak of the war. Most of the blood and chaos were taken away by this war with no smoke and blood. The few remnants were drowned in the continuous storm in Changdao. East Island was in chaos. Changdao was dead silent. The commotion caused by the superpowers entering Changdao had subsided. All the superpowers were quietly lurking, holding back, waiting for the right time to trigger the final battle. East Island had the home advantage and could start the final battle at any time. But the dark superpowers entering Changdao at this moment were not ordinary. As long as there was a chance, every superpower was qualified to start the final battle. The elites of the fire-flaming realm, the superiors of the thunder-shocking realm, the half-step invincible realm, even the invincible realm, and the famous murderous weapons of the dark world were all here. As time went by, the seemingly calm Changdao was actually getting more and more dangerous. It was like an explosive whose fuse had been ignited. The next second, the next minute, it could explode completely. Li Tianlon was waiting. The general trend was out of his control. All he could do was wait and see. But the process of waiting and seeing wasn't boring. In the last leisure time when the general trend seemed to be far away but was getting closer, Li Tianlon suddenly found that he could actually do a lot of things. Or even too many. The most important thing right now was to improve his strength. It was already the middle of July. Li Tianlon, who had too much vitality to squander, had basically recovered from his injury. It wasn't a blessing in disguise, but it was an indisputable fact that his strength had improved. During the battle in Zhongjing, under the pressure of Heavenly Calamity's death threat, Li Tianlan fell into an unprecedented state of fury. It could be said that by coincidence, his strength broke through again. And it was a double breakthrough. His real realm re-entered the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm. Within the effective range of the surge potion, his realm had reached the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. After the completion of the chi-controlling realm, he went further, especially the shadow formula, and the third shadow had reached the basic level. These days, he spent a lot of time meditating every year, adapting to the strange and familiar power in his body, and studying his own unique skills. The 24 moves of sword, night walking, Buddhist incantation of 9 words, desperate chase, and even the 2 unique skills of the Wang family of Beihai were recorded in the map of God of War. Li Tianlan now had too many unique skills. In addition, his chi-controlling realm had surpassed the so-called completion and flawless. How to integrate these strange unique skills and realms into one, and turn them into his own combat capability had become Li Tianlan's primary problem. Not only in East Island, but also in East Island. He didn't know when it started, but the second before his life ended, every time his strength improved, he would have a higher chance of survival. Survival! Grudges, the general trend, the past, and only survival kept moving forward in his heart until it occupied the most important position. An unprecedented sense of urgency occupied his heart. It was almost instinctive. Li Tianlan longed for all ways to become stronger. He didn't know why, but it was just a feeling. This feeling was called fear. It wasn't because of the fear of exposing his identity, but a vague intuition that seemed clear but also extremely vague. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was afraid of. He couldn't even tell exactly when this feeling began to exist. But the general trend was moving forward, the storm was getting more and more turbulent, and the feeling in his heart was getting more and more obvious. It was another deep night. In the rumbling sound of the wind and rain, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes from the deepest meditation. His eyes were solemn and calm. There was a faint light in the extremely luxuriously decorated room. His eyes took in everything in the room, and finally stopped on the beautiful figure in front of him. There was a bamboo rattan chair in the room. Dongqing Rushi sat quietly on the chair with her head down, playing with Li Tianlan's human emperor with interest. Her long black hair fell down like a waterfall, intentionally or unintentionally covering a small part of her face. The girl's face was beautiful, and her eyes were clear. Her every move was picturesque. Rushi! Li Tianlan called tentatively. Dongqing Rushi woke up about a week ago, and then she naturally lived in this villa. Her room was next to Li Tianlan's. She followed Li Tianlan most of the time except for resting. Beside Li Tianlan, she was really a girl without any sharpness or arrogance. She just followed Li Tianlan quietly and rarely took the initiative to speak, but she didn't refuse to chat with him. She accompanied him to meditate, eat with him, and meet with guests with him. This kind of relationship, which was forced together by engagement, was subtle and weird. But maybe because Dongqing Rushi was too quiet, Li Tianlan didn't feel embarrassed. So these days, although the two of them were not really attached to each other, in a sense, they were really a couple and rarely separated. At the beginning, Li Tianlan had tactfully said once that he wanted Dongqing Rushi to do her own thing. After all, the two of them were inseparable. Although it seemed natural, it was extremely strange in the eyes of others. Even Dongqing Rushi herself couldn't say that she loved him deeply. She was just trying very hard to maintain the identity of a fiancé and do what a fiancé should do. Li Tianlan still couldn't imagine what the identity of fiancé meant to Dongqing Rushi. But before he figured out how to deal with the relationship with Dongqing Rushi, this kind of intimacy, or superficial intimacy, was obviously not an appropriate approach. So Li Tianlan thought it was very appropriate to separate from Dongqing Rushi, at least for the time being. Dongqing Rushi didn't say anything. She just blinked her big clear eyes and looked at Li Tianlan for a while, then nodded and left. But in less than 5 minutes, she appeared in front of Li Tianlan again. It was Dongqing Yueshan. Dongqing Yueshan was much colder, sharper, and more arrogant than Dongqing Rushi. Since then, Li Tianlan refused to say anything more and let Dongqing Rushi follow him. Although it hadn't been a long time in a sense, he found that he had gotten used to this kind of quiet following. Ah! Dongqing Rushi responded. She raised her head subconsciously and said seriously, "You haven't talked to me for a long time." "I was meditating." Li Tianlan smiled and looked at the time. He had meditated for more than 6 hours, and it was almost midnight. "I know." Dongqing Rushi nodded and continued to look down at the human emperor in her hand. For her, she could carry the human emperor that weighed more than 50 kilograms, but it was not easy to use it easily. After playing with it for a while, her hands were a little sore. "Are you tired?" Li Tianlan took the human emperor and looked at Dongqing Rushi. The soft light, the beautiful girl, and the silver edge. Coming back to his senses from the silent meditation world, he clearly sensed this world, and the feeling in his heart seemed to begin to surge violently again. "I'm fine. Do you want to eat something?" Dongqing Rushi shook her head. Compared with Li Tianlan and even Li Beitian, Dongqing Rushi's meditation time was the shortest. She didn't even need to meditate. Her second personality, Dongqing Yueshan, was too weird, and the form it showed was extremely strong, even not weaker than the first personality's autonomy and independence. In this case, when the first personality was fighting or relaxing, the second personality could have enough time to meditate. Moreover, although all Dongqing Rushi's martial arts were inherited from Jade Pool, the core was on the silent sword. The sword intent on the silent sword was Dongqing Rushi's martial arts. When others were still struggling in the 4 realms of martial arts and trying their best to find a breakthrough, Dongqing Rushi just needed to feel the sword intent of the silent sword. To put it bluntly, others, including Li Tianlan, were all practicing unique skills while improving their realms. Dongqing Rushi only needed to practice unique skills with the help of the silent sword, and her realm would improve accordingly. The heavenly flying fairy sword. The peerless myriad sword. This was everything Dongqing Rushi had in martial arts. When these 2 sword intents reached the extreme and merged with silence, Dongqing Rushi could step into the invincible realm. The Great Way was the simplest. This could be said to be a shortcut, and the key to Dongqing Rushi reaching the peak of the fire-flaming realm at the age of 19. Although this method was rare, it was not unparalleled in the world. The Li family also had a similar unique skill path. The most important thing for such a path was to have a suitable carrier. The carrier of Jade Pool was the sword intent in the silent sword, and the carrier of the Li family was unique skills. If Li Tianlan only wanted to pursue the invincible realm, he didn't need to practice the complete 24 moves of sword. He only needed to practice the 15th blade of reincarnation, and then he would have a chance to enter the invincible realm. However, although this path was a shortcut, it was also very difficult. Even if he succeeded, the upper limit was too low, which was not in line with Li Tianlan's pursuit. Dongqing Rushi could take this path, except that she was a girl, and the only possibility was that her compatibility with the silent sword was almost perfect. Thinking of what Dongqing Yueshan said, Li Tianlan took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. "I'm not eating. I'm not hungry." He shook his head and said softly. The vague sense of oppression and fear in his heart existed almost all the time, and it was getting clearer and clearer. Li Tianlan was not in the mood to think about other things at all. After meditation, he had planned to continue studying the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of tribulation. He was destined to be sleepless tonight. "You're in a bad mood." Dongqing Rushi stood in front of Li Tianlan and said flatly. It was not a question, but an affirmation. Under the soft light, she stared at Li Tianlan quietly. Her eyes were clear, as if they were not stained by the magazines and dust of the mortal world. That was a very quiet power. In the past many years, had she been like this, staying on the peak of Tianshan, growing and blossoming quietly and quietly? Was she lonely? Was she bitter? Was she lost? Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Yueshan. What kind of power was surging behind the indifference and tranquility? Li Tianlan smiled slightly. At least at this moment, in front of Dongqing Rushi, he had let down his guard. "I'm scared." He looked into Dongqing Rushi's eyes and said calmly. "What are you afraid of?" Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan in confusion. But what she got was only silence. Li Tianlan thought about it seriously. He didn't know what he was afraid of. It was just a vague feeling or intuition that was getting clearer and clearer. It seemed to be losing. Losing. Li Tianlan murmured to himself and said softly, "You're afraid of losing, aren't you?" Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. She was extremely tall, so she could see Li Tianlan's eyes without deliberately looking up. At this moment, Li Tianlan said he was afraid, but there was no fear or retreat in his eyes. Dongqing Rushi only saw firmness, and the hidden wildness behind the firmness that could shake everything. Her clear eyes fluctuated slightly, like ripples on the water, spreading layer by layer. In the silence, Dongqing Rushi reached out and gently pulled Li Tianlan's palm, saying in a clear voice, "Don't be afraid. I'll be with you." Li Tianlan felt warm inside, but before he said anything, Dongqing Rushi continued, "The Dongqing clan will be with you too. When you were meditating, Grandpa called me. He said that things in East Island should be solved soon, at least there will be a result. Then he will ask us to go back to Zhongyuan and celebrate our birthdays." The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He knew very well what the invitation of the Dongqing clan meant at this time. When his identity was no longer a secret, when he had caused the hostility of Kunlun City and even the Wang family of Beihai and countless people, the Dongqing clan's statement meant support. And it was full support without any concealment. Li Tianlan had been carefully guarding against the kindness and possible malice of the Dongqing clan. But as the Dongqing clan went to the opposite side of Kunlun City, all the doubts in his heart suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan was excited and took a deep breath. Thank the old master for me. He was still worried, but he also knew very well that he couldn't refuse such help, and he had no right to refuse it. You're welcome. Dongqing Rushi was still indifferent, but her eyes lit up slightly. Grandpa said it's just a good time to save a cake. Well, she nodded, made a gesture and said, I want a big cake this time. Li Tianlan was a little lost in thought. He finally realized that something seemed to be wrong, so he said subconsciously, save a cake. Yes. Dongqing Rushi said softly, our birthdays are the same month and the same day. Li Tianlan froze. They were born on the same month and the same day. This sentence was like a breeze, directly blowing into the depths of Li Tianlan's heart. In an instant, fate seemed to be close at hand. Dongqing Rushi pulled Li Tianlan to sit on the bed and said softly, why are you afraid? To be exact, it's a sense of urgency. Li Tianlan shook his head. I always feel that something is going to happen. If I don't have enough strength, I'm likely to lose something. When did it start? Dongqing Rushi seemed to chuckle. It can't be intuition, can it? Prophecy? Li Tianlan was also smiling, but his smile was bitter. Countless images seemed to squeeze into his mind at the same time. When did it start? From the moment he saw Gong Sun Qi? Or from the moment he and Saint faced the murderous weapon? Or was it when the Duke handed him the list? Memories kept rolling, and all kinds of images appeared in his mind. They kept rolling, passing through the heavy rain in East Island, the Sky Academy, and finally stopped in the strange and hurried crowd. All the images suddenly disappeared. There was only a pair of eyes with faint coldness in front of Li Tianlan. They were dreamlike, perfect and flawless. Li Tianlan's face was livid, and he suddenly stood up. The pair of dreamy eyes became clearer and clearer, and the fear in his heart instantly reached the extreme. Until this moment, he realized that he hadn't heard from Qin Weibai for a long time. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed Qin Weibai's number immediately. No one answered. Li Tianlan didn't give up and started to send videos again. There was also no response. Li Tianlan's livid face began to turn pale. For many days, with Saint, Duke, Horsewoman, and the flaming fire supermasters around him, he began to instinctively feel that Qin Weibai was also extremely safe in Zhongzhou State. But it was not until this moment that he realized that they hadn't contacted each other for many days, which was a strange phenomenon. How was Qin Weibai now? Li Tianlan's livid face turned pale. He took the cell phone and sent a voice message word by word, answer my call, right now. There was no response. Li Tianlan managed to wait for 5 minutes. The atmosphere in the whole room gradually became oppressive and violent. Just when he was about to stand up and go to Duke, the long-lost video ringtone finally rang. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and answered the video call without hesitation. The delicate face that seemed to have been missed day and night and ignored for a long time appeared in front of Li Tianlan in the video call. Qin Weibai was wearing a white bathrobe and was wiping her hair with a towel. I was taking a shower just now, she said softly, Your tone is very strange. Are you angry with me? No. All the anxiety and fear in Li Tianlan's heart suddenly disappeared, leaving only complete peace. He scratched his head and said softly, I just miss you. Qin Weibai's beautiful red lips gently raised, and her eyes were bright. Her whole body released a kind of almost suffocating charm. Me too, she said softly. I miss you very, very much. Li Tianlan gave a silly laugh and said, Where are you? Why haven't you contacted me for so long? Qin Weibai's expression slightly froze, and she said in a low voice, I'm still in the Sky Academy. Well, there are a lot of things going on recently, and your side is more complicated. You must be very busy these days, right? Actually, there's nothing to be busy about. Li Tianlan's heart became more and more relaxed. It seems that things have stabilized for now. Stability is only temporary. Qin Weibai said, You have to be careful in East Island. Tianlan, the situation will change soon. I've received the news that Shinichi Miyamoto personally met the Mikado and promised to solve all the disputes in Chongdao within 7 days. In 7 days, no matter what, there will be a clear result. 7 days. Li Tianlan's eyes slightly narrowed, and he slowly said, How many days is this? The first day. Qin Weibai calmly said. Li Tianlan nodded. Now everyone knew that the final battle was near, but no one knew that the final battle was so close. Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a possibility that he had guessed for a long time, and he couldn't help but say, Weibai, how much do you know about the mysterious force in East Island? I know a lot, but also very little. For now, they are our partners, and that's basically it. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's face seriously, as if she wanted to engrave every expression on his face into the depths of her soul. Honey, no matter what I do, I won't hurt you. Do you trust me? She said. Almost instinctively, Li Tianlan nodded and said without hesitation, I believe you. Qin Weibai's eyes were brighter, with undisguised happiness and satisfaction. The storm is about to pass, and you can leave East Island soon, she said with a smile. Wait for me to go back. Li Tianlan nodded, and then he suddenly raised his eyebrows and said, Before I left, I remember you said that you would give me a reward when I go back. Does that still count? What reward do you want? Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan with her charming eyes, and every move she made was the charm and style of a little woman. She was beautiful, and her grace was unparalleled. Get married and have children? Li Tianlan said jokingly. Qin Weibai's face changed slightly, and her charming smile became a little stiff, and there seemed to be a trace of inexplicable fear in her eyes. Before Li Tianlan noticed her abnormality, she forced a smile and said, You are still young. Li Tianlan, who had been in a good mood, laughed and said nothing. Dongqing Rushi, who had been silent, seemed to be unwilling to be ignored. She hesitated for a moment, and then her beautiful face finally came over. Looking at the beautiful woman on the screen, she opened her small mouth slightly, as if she was a little surprised, but there was no jealousy in her clear eyes, only the most simple curiosity. Qin Weibai was also stunned, and she glanced at Li Tianlan with a faint smile. Li Tianlan coughed, and when he was about to say something, Qin Weibai looked at Dongqing Rushi and said, Hello, I'm Qin Weibai. I'm Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi also came to her senses and said quietly. After greeting each other, they didn't say anything more. Qin Weibai put the towel in her hand aside, looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, I'll hang up first. Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. Qin Weibai held the phone. The second before she hung up, she took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi. Her eyes were complicated, and she seemed to be sorry. She told Li Tianlan that she was still in the Sky Academy, but she was actually in Chongdao now. This was a hotel that was not too luxurious, and it was less than 5 kilometers away from the club where Li Tianlan was. As the screen of the phone gradually dimmed, Qin Weibai, who was wearing a snow-white bathrobe, got up gently and walked to the French window. She was in a different place from Li Tianlan, enjoying the same storm under the same sky. The distance of 5 kilometers wasn't far, but she stopped here. She didn't dare to see Li Tianlan, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't dare to. Just like what she said to the mysterious highness in Dongdu a few hours ago. It was better not to see him. The sky outside the window was as dark as ink, and the storm was still heavy. Qin Wei Bai, who was as perfect as a dream, stood quietly in front of the window, enjoying the wind and rain in the night. She smiled gently, but her eyes were sad and lonely. She looked down at Li Tianlan on the phone screen and whispered to herself, "Your final sky, I'm not there." The wind and rain cut through the darkness and fell on the ground, splashing water. Chapter 197. The long night was coming to an end. When the darkness dissipated and the bright morning light shone through the window, Li Tianlan, who had been in the same position all night, finally moved his body. It seemed that he hadn't moved for a long time. As he moved, the sound of his joints vibrating came from his body. In the clear sound, he began to concentrate completely. His eyes were a little sore because he stayed up all night. He turned off the lamp in front of him, shook his head hard, and looked out of the window. The pale golden morning light shone through the window. The soft light shone into the bedroom. The sky was high and the clouds were light. The sun was rising. Outside the French window, the trees and flowers were all bathing in the long-lost sunshine on such an early morning. Li Tianlan slightly narrowed his swollen eyes and came to the window. He looked at the sunshine outside the window with no expression. The rainstorm that swept through the whole East Island had stopped. Outside the window, there were crystal drops of water hanging on the treetops, shining with a subtle and soft light in the sunshine. The first day of the 7-day period passed quietly in the bright and rare sunshine. Wind, rain, and sunshine. The natural environment was alternating. But the depression in Li Tianlan's heart never decreased. Meditation had almost replaced his sleep. He was busiest when he had nothing to do. The unique techniques of Zhuanyuantai, tribulation, and even the Wang family of Beihai were running in his mind all the time. Li Tianlan had never had this kind of mentality before. This kind of desire, even the crazy mentality of wanting to become stronger. The mentality of survival and becoming stronger had been messed up. Li Tianlan couldn't be sure whether he wanted to become stronger because he wanted to survive or to survive because he wanted to be stronger. He didn't bother to think about it. There was not much conflict between the two. He was still alive, so he would try his best to become stronger. That was all. The morning sun rose slowly in the cool morning wind. The light covered the earth and shone on every corner. Li Tianlan didn't move, letting the sun cover him. In the morning light, his whole body seemed to be emitting a pale golden brilliance. In the blurry light and shadow, there was a calm and determined face. Dongqing Rushi had already sat up from the bed. She blinked her sleepy eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's back. She didn't leave last night, nor did she do anything intimate with Li Tianlan. When Li Tianlan was studying unique skills, she slept on Li Tianlan's bed. The simplest companionship was also the most silent and gentle. No one could know how perfectly Tianlan had been instilled in Dongqing Rushi's mind since she was a child. He was everywhere, and as the two of them got closer, the vague impression seemed to become clearer and clearer. Dongqing Rushi's two personalities couldn't be sure if this was love, but even if it had nothing to do with love, playing the role of a fiancé was definitely what she wanted to do most now. She moved her body on the bed, and the confusion in her eyes gradually disappeared. She gradually became clear-headed and cold. Haste makes waste. You've heard of this saying, right? I don't object to you risking your life, but proper rest is still necessary. Otherwise, it will only have the opposite effect. She looked at Li Tianlan's back shrouded in light and said in a flat tone. He didn't need to ask which personality of Dongqing Rushi this tone belonged to. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and was not surprised. He said calmly, I've already rested. 2 hours of sleep a day? Or nearly 10 hours of meditation? If you think that this so-called rest can help you, then forget about what I said. Dongqing Yueshan's tone was a little cold. Li Tianlan frowned and said nothing. So far, he had seen Dongqing Yueshan 3 times. But each time they talked, they parted on bad terms. Li Tianlan didn't hate Dongqing Yueshan's personality, but it was hard for him to like her. Generally speaking, she seemed to be born with a bad temper. What on earth are you worried about? Dongqing Yueshan sighed softly, got out of bed and walked to Li Tianlan. Samsara. Li Tianlan didn't hesitate this time. He seemed to have an answer in his heart. In the morning light, he took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and suddenly said, Does the Dongqing clan have any information about Samsara's action this time? Dongqing Yueshan froze for a moment. Li Tianlan continued, this time Jianghu state is plotting against East Island. Samsara is fully cooperating, but it can't be voluntary help, right? What does Samsara want? Do you have any information about this? Dongqing Yueshan thought about it and shook her head. No. You should know that our family can't care about this now. In our family, except for you and me, only my godfather is in Chongdao. The others are in Jianghu state. The Battle of Chongdao is not the focus of our family. Our family. Dongqing Yueshan said this word naturally, almost instinctively. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her and said nothing. Right now, the main focus of the Dongqing clan was not on Chongdao. Even Jade Pool didn't make much effort in this nation-toppling plot. When countless forces of Jianghu state began to expand outward, someone in the rear had to pay attention to the defense. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu state, was flying around the camps of the Border Control Corps almost every day. He had no time to care about Chongdao and Samsara. Right now, Jianghu state wasn't peaceful either. A large number of East Island experts were trapped in Huiting, including several experts of the Invincible Realm. The whole of Huiting could become the fourth battlefield besides Chongdao, North America, and Northern Europe at any time. Similarly, the famous Border Control Corps of Jianghu state was also an obvious target. The Dark World was a world full of cruelty, blood, and violence. But behind a series of negative words, it also meant that this was an absolutely rational world, especially when the superpowers rarely fought against each other. In the current situation, the special warfare system of East Island was in danger, and it was inevitable that Jianghu state would benefit. So it was time to pay attention to balance. If East Island was driven to desperation, it might let the experts trapped in Huiting break out of the encirclement and turn Huiting into a new battlefield. But if there were no great benefits, how could other forces cooperate willingly? They paid attention to balance. Since the rise of the Snowdance Corps was inevitable, it was acceptable to inflict a heavy blow on the Border Control Corps and let the Snowdance Corps grow. The Border Control Corps was famous, and all of them were elites. But it was much easier to attack them at the border than to sneak into an away battlefield. Everyone understood this. Now all the eyes of the Dongqing clan and Jade Pool were focused on the defense of Jianghu state. To put it bluntly, they didn't care about anything here in Chongdao at all. Don't worry. Her Highness of Samsara defeated Gu Xingyun and is in the limelight. Who will have the time to mess with her? She'll be fine. Dongqing Yueshan said slowly. Li Tianlan nodded and then shook his head. He said with gloomy eyes, I'm worried about her after the battle with Gu Xingyun. Dongqing Yueshan didn't know what to say about this. In recent months, the most glamorous person in the whole dark world was undoubtedly the mysterious master of Samsara Palace. She killed Night Spirit, entered Mount Dibing, fought Gu Xingyun, and plotted against Jianghu state. She was a woman, but she had a kind of powerful spirit. Her every move had a kind of unparalleled divine power. But all of this happened too frequently. Li Tianlan wasn't the only one who was worried about the state of the master of Samsara Palace at the moment. Most people were not optimistic about her current state. What do you want to eat? I'll do it. Dongqing Yueshan was silent for a while. Then she simply changed the topic and asked. The Dongqing clan had always been very clear about the cultivation of Dongqing Rushi. First of all, she was the fiancée of the Li family, and second, she was a genius of martial arts. Under this cultivation mode, Dongqing Rushi's cooking skills were needless to say. A breakfast was no problem for Dongqing Rushi's two personalities. No. Li Tianlan shook his head, turned around, and said, I don't have an appetite. I'm going out for a walk. Dongqing Yueshan said faintly, Oh, I'll accompany you. I can take a breath of fresh air. You. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Yueshan with a strange look. Dongqing Yueshan, whose personality was sharp and almost fierce, snorted coldly and said directly, Do you have a problem with that? Shouldn't you go back? Li Tianlan said euphemistically. It was easier for him to accept the main personality of Dongqing Rushi. She was peaceful, pure, beautiful, and noble without any blemish. I'm not going back. Dongqing Yueshan shook her head, glanced at Li Tianlan, and said with a faint smile, If you want to see her tomorrow. Li Tianlan paused, looked at Dongqing Yueshan thoughtfully, and suddenly said, "Rushi really doesn't know about your existence?" "For the time being, yes," Dongqing Yueshan said faintly. "But if you accompany me today, when she shows up tomorrow, who can explain to her what happened today?" Li Tianlan squinted and asked, "We only have 7 days. Now is the first day." "I have my ways," Dongqing Yueshan said faintly, and went straight into the bathroom to wash up. Li Tianlan stood where he was, and his eyes became deeper and deeper. Until this moment, he vaguely realized that Dongqing Rushi did have a split personality, but the Dongqing Yueshan in front of him was no longer the sub-personality of Dongqing Rushi. She had a dual personality, 2 completely independent consciousnesses. In this sense, when Dongqing Yueshan appeared, she was Dongqing Yueshan, and Dongqing Rushi was already in a deep sleep. Even if Li Tianlan was not an expert in this field, he knew how rare it was to have 2 almost independent consciousnesses in one body. But before he decided whether to study it or not, there was a knock on the door. Li Baitian's voice came from outside the door. "Tianlan, are you up?" Li Tianlan was stunned. He answered and walked over to open the door. Although the people of East Emperor Palace had lived in the same villa for many days, they didn't have much time to see each other. Under the pressure of the general trend, everyone was trying their best to improve their strength. Even if they met each other after meditation, they would be busy with their own things after a few words. Li Tianlan couldn't remember how long he hadn't seen Li Baitian. At this time, when he heard his voice, he had a strange feeling. Li Baitian, who was dressed in a neat suit, was standing in front of the door and tidying up his clothes. Seeing Li Tianlan come out, he casually said hello. "Morning." "Morning." Li Tianlan nodded. Looking at Li Baitian, who was dressed so formally, he smiled unexpectedly and said, "Dressed like this, are you going on a date?" "It's stupid to dress like this for a date. Damn it, this shit is suffocating me." Li Baitian pulled the tie on his collar and said with a wry smile, "There's a meeting today. I'm here to say hello to you. All the superpowers are going to attend. You should also get ready. I guess someone will come to pick you up soon." He paused, shook his head, and said with a slightly complicated tone, "I really want to go with you." "Now, hey. It's okay." Li Tianlan shook his head with a smile and said, "There will always be a chance in the future." Although Li Baitian didn't say it explicitly, Li Tianlan knew what the so-called meeting was. The final battle was about to break out. Jianghu State really needed a meeting with enough weight to coordinate all aspects. Now there were nearly 2,000 elites of Jianghu State in Changdao, but only a few were qualified to attend this meeting. Those who could step into the meeting were all powerful, influential figures. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace had just been established. As a department-level agency, its starting point was definitely not low. But such an agency was a piece of cake in the eyes of the big shots. Institutions of this level, to put it bluntly, were no different from cannon fodder in the Battle of Changdao. The reason why Li Baitian could attend this meeting was not because of East Emperor Palace, but because of Mount Shu. Mount Shu's Great Void Sword Master. This identity was much more important, especially in the current situation. Different from Jade Pool, which focused on defense and Dongqing clan's advance and retreat, Mount Shu was arguably one of the most active transcendental forces in Jianghu State's plot. Swords scattered in the southwest. In the past 2 months, the personnel of the special warfare system in the southwest of Jianghu State had changed frequently. A considerable part of the leaders of the Special Warfare Agency were replaced by swordsmen from Mount Shu. From the southwest border to the southwest inland, the brilliant sword intent of Mount Shu was shining everywhere. Mount Shu's Phantom Sword Master went to the southwest border. Yin and Yang Sword Master Han Chongyang went to Changdao in person. Mount Shu never lacked resources. Once their thousands of sword intents broke out, in a short time, both their influence and strength were expanding rapidly. Nowadays, Mount Shu had become a force that couldn't be ignored, whether it was the defense of the southwest of Jianghu State or the Battle of Changdao. If Yin and Yang Sword Master Han Chongyang didn't come, it would be fine. But with Yin and Yang Sword Master Han Chongyang here, no matter how young Li Baitian, the Great Void Sword Master, was, no one dared to ignore him. Li Baitian would attend the upcoming meeting as the Great Void Sword Master of Mount Shu, and Li Tianlan would probably attend the meeting as the Samsara Palace. As for the East Emperor Palace before it grew up, it was a complete joke in the eyes of the big shots. "Change your clothes." Li Baitian shook his head. Today, All the big shots of the domestic special warfare system are here. We can't lose. I just got a call. I guess people from Samsara will come to pick you up soon. Li Tianlan nodded. Before he said anything, Dongqing Yueshan, who had finished washing, walked out of the bathroom. She asked casually, "Where are you going?" "There's a meeting later. I guess I have to go too." Li Tianlan answered casually as well. There were two groups of elites that Zhongzhou State sent to East Island. The first group was relatively simple. Most of them were elites of the Special Warfare System or freshmen of the Special Warfare Academy. But the second group was completely different. There were many extraordinary figures in it. Although the second group was only about 600 people, the weakest one was an elite in the fire-flaming realm. Some transcendental or neutral forces like the Terracotta Army, Mount Shu, Azura Path, Sai City, and Kunlun City also gathered together. This was an extremely powerful force, but it also contained complicated and entangled grievances. It was really hard to say what the meeting would be like. "I'll go with you," Dongqing Yueshan said. "Oh." This was also where she was different from Dongcheng Rushi. She was direct and almost domineering. This sentence from her mouth was not so much a discussion as a notification. Li Tianlan nodded subconsciously. His mind was not on this at all. The two naturally asked and answered, but Li Beitian, who was beside them, gradually became dull. Dongqing Rushi's fiancé was Li Tianlan. Before this, even Ning Qianqing did not know this news. Now it was no longer a secret, but Li Beitian did not expect that the two would develop so fast. How long had it been? Did the second miss of the Dongqing clan sleep with Tianlan? Fuck, the couple in the name of fiancé and fiancée was really unscrupulous and domineering. Li Beitian's eyes flickered. He inadvertently caught a glimpse of a faint white at the corner of Dongqing Yueshan's mouth. The white was so small and faint that it could not be seen clearly. But the more he looked at it, the more suspicious he felt. The corner of Li Beitian's mouth twitched slightly. Looking at Li Tianlan, who still looked calm, he really wanted to beat this bastard to death for indulging in sex so early in the morning. "I'll go pick out some clothes for you." After saying this, Dongqing Yueshan wiped the remaining toothpaste foam at the corner of her mouth and turned to leave. Li Beitian's expression was strange and he was speechless for a moment. "What's wrong?" Another voice abruptly rang out. Ning Qianqing's figure walked out of the bedroom not far away and looked at Li Beitian. "I'm worshipping my idol. Look at my expression. Don't I look very pious?" Li Beitian looked at Ning Qianqing and said. Ning Qianqing seemed to be in a very bad mood and his face was a little gloomy. He frowned inexplicably and looked puzzled. "Look, it's this one. Come and take a look." Li Beitian looked at Li Tianlan with an exaggerated expression. "The strongest holy knight of the century has appeared. Brother, aren't you going to worship him?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Tianlan and Ning Qianqing said in unison. "Goddess Qin, Dongqing Rushi, Wang Yuetong. Teske, who can ride a goddess if not a holy knight? Tianlan, you're good. I felt sorry for you because Goddess Qin appeared by your side, but it turns out that you're the pickiest and want the best of everything. I've seen a dragon knight in Master Jin's martial arts novel, but I didn't expect to become a brother with a holy knight. I'd feel sorry for myself if I didn't worship him." "Fuck you." Li Tianlan scolded with a smile and pretended to rush forward to kick him. Li Beitian laughed and disappeared in a flash. "I'll go down and have a look. You guys talk." Li Tianlan shook his head helplessly and looked at the silent Ning Qianqing. "What's wrong? Why do you look so bad so early in the morning?" "Nothing serious." Ning Qianqing shook his head and said, "There's a meeting in a while. Did Beitian tell you about it?" Li Tianlan grunted and then felt something was wrong. He looked up at Ning Qianqing and said, "You're going to attend? What's your identity?" Li Beitian was the great void swordmaster of Mount Shu. It was understandable that he would attend the meeting. As for Li Tianlan himself, several supermasters of Samsara were around him because of his relationship with Qin Weibai. He had to attend as well. As for Ning Qianqing, Li Tianlan really didn't expect him. "I'm one of the representatives of the Eastern Theater of Operations," Ning Qianqing said with a gloomy face. The representative of the Eastern Theater of Operations. Li Tianlan was stunned. He looked at Ning Qianqing and didn't say anything for a while. Ning Qianqing's father, Ning Ziyuan, was the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations in Jianghu State. The Eastern Theater of Operations invested so much in the Battle of Changdao that it was incredible. In terms of strength, it was hard to say which force was the most powerful. But in terms of numbers, the Eastern Theater of Operations invested more than any other force in Jianghu State. Ning Qianqing became one of the representatives of the Eastern Theater of Operations, which meant that he had become one of the leaders of the Eastern Theater of Operations in the plot against East Island. "Have you talked to General Ning?" Li Tianlan asked softly. He knew very well about the knot between Ning Qianqing and Ning Ziyuan. He couldn't empathize with the past, but if the father and son could reconcile, it wouldn't be a bad thing anyway. No. Ning Qianqing's gloomy face showed some confusion. "It was the marshal who called me. He asked me to go." Dongqing Wudi's order? Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat and his eyes suddenly became deep. The commander of the Border Praetorian Corps was intentionally or unintentionally interfering in the affairs of the Eastern Theater of Operations. What did this mean? Jianghu State, East Island, inside and out. It seemed that everything was getting more and more complicated. "I got it." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he nodded and said, "Let's go downstairs and talk." Ning Qianqing agreed. The two of them went downstairs side by side. For a while, no one spoke. "Marshal Dongqing, do you have a good relationship with General Ning?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. "How good can it be?" "Just a nodding acquaintance. At least as far as I know, the two of them didn't have any contact before. At most, they just greeted each other at a meeting." Ning Qianqing shook his head gently. "That's what I'm most surprised about. The Eastern Theater of Operations sent 2 batches to Changdao, and more than 80% of them were my father's henchmen. After these people left, his control over the Eastern Theater of Operations would decline. It's impossible that he didn't know that the marshal asked me to be the representative of the Eastern Theater of Operations. Now the result is..." He didn't continue but started to think. Li Tianlan didn't say anything either. The current situation was really complicated. The struggle in the dark world was complicated, the attitude of East Island was complicated, and the entanglement behind the scenes in Jianghu State was also complicated. Li Tianlan had seen some things clearly now. But the more he saw, the more he realized that he couldn't see. When the wind and rain stopped and the sun rose, in front of Li Tianlan's eyes, there was still a mist. After seeing Li Baidian and Ning Qianqing off, Li Tianlan stood alone in the yard, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air that he hadn't seen for a long time. But his mind had already drifted somewhere. The breeze blew softly in the sunshine, bringing with it a gradually burning warmth. A deep voice suddenly rang out and interrupted Li Tianlan's thoughts. "Good morning, young master." Su Chu, who was as tall as a giant, stood in front of Li Tianlan, giving off a sense of oppression and power. "Good morning." Li Tianlan opened his eyes and nodded with a smile. But his eyes instinctively moved to the back of Su Chu. Behind Su Chu, 3 figures in black were standing quietly, not revealing any aura. Under the bright sunshine, there seemed to be darkness spreading around the 3, swallowing everything around them. "Marshal Uncle." Li Tianlan froze for a moment, then smiled in surprise. "You're back from Dongdu?" Among the 3 men in black, Tribulation, who stood in the center, nodded and said in a low voice, "Just arrived." Before Li Tianlan could speak, he continued, "Tianlan, change your clothes. There will be a meeting later, and you'll attend it with us." Li Tianlan's smile suddenly froze on his face. He knew that he would attend this meeting, but he didn't expect that he would attend it with Sai City instead of Samsara Palace. The news was so sudden that he wasn't mentally prepared at all. "Marshal Uncle." His smile slowly faded and he said calmly, "Where are Duke and the others?" Tribulation was silent for a moment, and then he said calmly, "They've left, a few hours ago." "They've all left?" "They've all left." Tribulation nodded. "But they'll attend the meeting later, and Sai City will take care of everything you have in East Island from now on." Li Tianlan's mouth moved, but he couldn't say anything. At this moment, he suddenly thought of Li Baidian, Ning Qianqing, and several supermasters of Samsara who had left without saying goodbye. However, those vivid images, including Tribulation, had all become chess pieces in his mind at this time. He himself became a chess piece. The general trend was like a chessboard, and everyone was a chess piece. In every slight or serious turbulence of the situation, all the chess pieces were uncontrollably moving closer or farther away. Involuntarily, faintly, he could clearly sense that some things were approaching him, while others were moving further away from him. It turned out that the farther away. Li Tianlan looked calm. Chapter 198. Everything seemed to be unstoppable. This was Li Tianlan's sudden thought. The wind and rain in the dark world seemed to be changing all the time. Being in the rainstorm, Li Tianlan had a feeling that if Jianghu State's plot against East Island at the beginning was just a pure accident, then the layout after the accident was full of artificial traces. At this point, Li Tianlan wasn't sure if the situation was out of Jianghu State's control. But in the general trend, he could already see a looming black hand pushing everything forward. The departure of samsara. All the superpowers entered Changdao. Even the activity of Mount Shu and the Eastern Theater of Operations. And the current currency war. Every step seemed to be under the control of the Black Hand, and it never deviated from the original track. And as time went by, all the current events seemed to be slowly coming to an end. 7 days. When the time passed, what would happen to Jianghu State, East Island, and the superpowers in the dark world? Li Tianlan thought silently. At this moment, he felt very complicated inside. This kind of view of the general trend from a very high place with very low strength was broad enough, but it didn't feel good. He could clearly feel that something was slowly changing, but he couldn't do anything about it, so he was unwilling to accept it. He stood very high, but not the highest, because there was still wind and rain above his head, so he was depressed. If I am invincible? Li Tianlan laughed at himself, looked at Tribulation in front of him and nodded. I see. At this moment, his expression was calm and tough, as if he could suppress everything. But how horrible it would be when all the suppression broke out. He took a deep breath, hid all his emotions, and suddenly said, "Who are these two?" The two men in black who came with Tribulation were a man and a woman. The woman looked younger, at most 30 years old, with a plump figure and delicate skin. She wore loose black clothes and wore no makeup. She looked a little mysterious and enchanting, like a black rose. At first glance she looked weird, but at a closer look, she had a kind of charm. The man next to the woman had a beard and a weathered face. He was tall and thin, and his ordinary appearance looked extremely gentle. When they didn't speak, they stood beside Tribulation like two shadows, dark and ethereal, without any sense of existence. But Li Tianlan clearly felt danger from them. That faint, almost non-existent feeling made him instinctively vigilant, and even his body seemed to be subconsciously in a defensive state. Assassin. This was Li Tianlan's first impression. An assassin who did not reveal his aura or even carry killing intent was undoubtedly a top-notch assassin. I'm Yumu. Before Tribulation could introduce her, the woman standing on his left had already bowed slightly. She was obviously in a low position, but she did it with elegance and arrogance. Her voice was clear and extremely cold, yet it carried a trace of tenderness that made one's heart tremble. I'm Sunset Shadow. The middle-aged man on the right side of Tribulation laughed freely and heroically, with a kind of unique coldness and boldness after being attacked by wind and snow. His voice was not very loud, but it was extremely clear and sounded penetrating. In Li Tianlan's slightly narrowed eyes, Yumu and Sunset Shadow bowed at the same time and said calmly, "Greetings, young master." Young master. Su Chu's face suddenly changed. Dongqing Yueshan, who had just stepped into the villa and saw this scene, was also shocked. Only Li Tianlan, the person involved, remained calm. He suppressed all his inner emotions at the bottom of his heart and always maintained extreme calmness and restraint. Young master, he muttered to himself, then nodded and repeated, "Well, young master, from today on, you are the young governor of Sai City. From now on, there will always be a place for you on Mount Tai Bai." Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan, who was as calm as the deep sea in front of him, and said with unquestionable determination, "No matter what." Li Tianlan looked up at Tribulation. Tribulation was dressed in black, and the silver mask hid all his expressions, but his eyes were shining with cold and blazing light. No matter what. The meaning of these 4 words seemed to be more meaningful than the identity of the young governor of Sai City. And it was much more meaningful. From Qin Weibai's man to the young governor of Sai City. From a strange young heavenly son to the descendant of the Li family. This was especially so for the former. A private identity that was sufficiently illustrious but tainted with too much ambiguity had directly become an official identity that could not be underestimated. Li Tianlan could adapt to it, but he couldn't and didn't want to adapt to this change. There was still a mist in front of him, but some clear outlines had begun to appear in the mist. Why? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He was baffled by this question, but he believed that Tribulation could understand what he meant. I don't know. Tribulation was not at a loss, but he did not give any answer. Still too weak. Li Tianlan laughed at himself and said, Too weak. Do you regret it? Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan and asked. Li Tianlan's strength was actually not weak. If he did not choose to recultivate, with his strength of the thunder-shocking realm and his current wind and thunder veins, even in this battle of Changdao, no one dared to ignore him, just like Wang Xianxia now. Tribulation couldn't tell Li Tianlan any answer, but he knew that if Li Tianlan hadn't recultivated, this period of time, which was not wasted but could be regarded as tempering, was enough for Li Tianlan to go further in the thunder-shocking realm and even reach the stabilization phase. If Li Tianlan had not recultivated, everything that happened today might have been a different plan. I don't regret it. Li Tianlan shook his head and said softly, I just don't want to give up. After a long silence, Tribulation reached out and patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder, saying faintly, Time will prove everything. Li Tianlan smiled and said, I'm going to change clothes, and then go to the meeting. Tribulation nodded and watched Li Tianlan's figure walk back into the villa. He walked so calmly, but no one could know that his heart had been twisted into a ball. That was the most direct pain and confusion. The moment he heard the words young governor of Sai City, he had already understood. Some things did not just leave him, but were cut off. The most thorough, complete cut. Li Tianlan did not know the future, but he could feel that, at least for a long time, it was almost impossible for the things that were cut off to be reunited. Time passed by only for a moment. Li Tianlan's figure reappeared again. His expression was still calm, but his clothes had changed. A black suit, a black tie, and a white shirt. Li Tianlan, who was dressed so formally for the first time, did not look uncomfortable at all. The clean and tidy black made him look more spirited, and his eyes, which had always been calm and gentle, began to show sharpness gradually. Let's go. Li Tianlan walked to Tribulation and said, Su Chu and Rushi will go with me. Tribulation nodded, took out a willow leaf-shaped badge from his arms, and pinned it on Li Tianlan's chest. The lines of the badge were beautiful and smooth, and the whole body was black. But the center of the badge was engraved with a thin but extremely bright white line, which ran directly through the whole willow leaf from top to bottom. Like the first ray of light in the darkness, it suddenly rose, vast and dazzling. This is the badge of Sai City. I should have given it to you earlier, but now it's not too late. Tribulation personally put the badge on Li Tianlan and said softly. Li Tianlan tightly pursed his lips and nodded. The badge was put on Li Tianlan's chest. This willow leaf seemed to be extraordinarily heavy, and a powerful force hit his heart. The sound of being cut seemed to ring in his ears again, and it was irresistible. Li Tianlan instinctively gritted his teeth and straightened his body. At this moment, everyone could clearly feel Li Tianlan's almost cold calmness. It seemed that he was suppressing something, and also seemed to be enduring something. The morning sun turned into a scorching sun, and the sky was clear. The storm had stopped, but it was not over. In the hot and dull air, Li Tianlan walked out of the tree-lined courtyard and went straight to the venue. Beside him was Tribulation, the king of shadow in the dark world. They were Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, the top assassins who had become more and more representative of Sai City in recent years. They were Dongqing Rushi and Su Chu, the two geniuses of the younger generation who had risen to fame. And in the venue in front of him on the left and right, there were Ning Qianqing and Li Beitian, all his brothers. Through the sunlight outside the car window, Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly firm and cold. The venue was located on a mountain in the south of the club. The mountain was moderate in height, and the meeting room, which was like a hall, stood on the top of the mountain, full of mottled ancient traces. When Li Tianlan and the others arrived, there were still people coming in and out of the wide door of the meeting room. It seemed that Li Tianlan's initial speculation was not so correct. At least there were many people who could participate in this meeting, and only a few people could have decision-making power. Li Tianlan pushed the door and got out of the car. He walked to the door of the meeting room without hesitation, not even glancing at the scenery around the mountain top. Whether it was Tribulation, Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, or Su Chu, they all consciously kept a distance from Li Tianlan and crowded around him. Only Dongqing Yueshan naturally held Li Tianlan's arm and followed him. Outside the door of the laboratory, more and more people began to stop. They looked at Li Tianlan and the top assassins of Sai City behind him with complicated eyes. Li Tianlan completely ignored everything. He walked in a straight line and walked into the door of the meeting room unhurriedly. Almost at the same time, another group of people stepped out of the door of the meeting room. The moment the two sides faced each other, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. Duke walked in the front, and beside him were horsewomen and flaming fire. Duke looked at Li Tianlan with an indifferent expression. Li Tianlan was expressionless. The two sides, who should have been close, seemed to be hostile. The meeting room was a circular space, surrounded by layers of leather chairs. The outermost circle was the largest and had the most people sitting on it. The larger circle surrounded the smaller circle, and the deeper it was, the fewer seats there were. Everyone's status could be seen from where they sat. The one closest to the center of the circle naturally had a higher status. Li Tianlan glanced around and took a step directly. He was still walking in a straight line. The distance between Samsara Palace and Sai City was rapidly narrowing. Everyone noticed this scene. Regardless of whether they were inside or outside, everyone raised their heads and watched quietly. Duke didn't move. Li Tianlan moved forward. 7 meters. 5 meters. 3 meters. Li Tianlan's direction didn't change at all. He moved forward, straight ahead. At the moment when the two sides were about to collide, there seemed to be a sigh in the air. Duke's body quietly gave way and walked to the side. Li Tianlan walked over calmly, without stopping or looking back. Under the bright lights in the meeting room, Li Tianlan, in a black suit, walked through the outermost area, walked through the center, and went straight to the core area of the meeting room. There were two people worthy of his attention. Wang Xianxia, who represented the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanzhan, who represented Kunlun City. And he, who represented Sai City. In the silence, only the footsteps of Li Tianlan and his party echoed in the room. The light fell softly. At this moment, Li Tianlan was still unhurried, but his whole body seemed to have a trace of majesty and sharpness that was almost grand and magnificent. No one stopped Li Tianlan from moving forward. No one raised the slightest objection. On this day in Changdao, under the silent gaze of countless special warfare elites of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan walked into the meeting room that represented power, status, and responsibility, and finally sat down in the most central area. There were many people around him, but there were only two young people. Wang Xianxiao, Gu Hanzhan. Dressed up. Li Tianlan's feet stepped on the ground, and his expression became more and more indifferent. The era was under his feet. As time went by, today was just the beginning. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.